Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The air around the landing pad shimmered with heat, even though the sky above Zephyr was thick with ash. Dr. Adam Kepler stepped off the shuttle, a small but determined figure amidst the chaos, his medical bag slung over his shoulder. The distant sounds of artillery fire echoed across the barren plains, a constant reminder of the conflict that had ravaged this planet for over a decade. Adam had seen war before, but something about Zephyr felt different. This wasn't just a battlefield, this was a world on the brink of collapse, where hope had been traded for survival long ago. He glanced at the desolate horizon, taking in the makeshift medical tents spread out before him. There was no order here. No sense of calm amidst the rows of injured soldiers and civilians. The field hospital was understaffed, overrun, and barely hanging on by a thread. Adam tightened his grip on the strap of his bag and made his way toward the command center. "Dr. Kepler," a voice called out from behind him, strained and hoarse. He turned to see a tall, lanky figure approaching, an Elrian medic, identified by his almost translucent skin and elongated limbs. "You're in charge here now. We weren't sure you'd make it." Adam offered a small nod, his mind already racing through the litany of challenges he'd have to face. "What's the status?" he asked, cutting straight to the point. The Elrian's thin lips pressed into a tight line. "We're losing more than we're saving. Vormag forces breached the western perimeter last night and most of our supplies were destroyed in the attack. We've managed to set up a few triage stations, but the wounded keep pouring in. And there's another problem." Adam felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. "Go on." "A plague. It's spreading through the camps, affecting different species in different ways. We've never seen anything like it. Without the right equipment, we can't even diagnose it properly." Adam's pulse quickened. A plague on top of a war? The galaxy had a cruel sense of humor. He turned his gaze back to the chaotic medical tents. "Show me." The Elrian led him to the main tent, where rows of cots stretched out, each one occupied by soldiers from various alien races. The air was thick with a stench of antiseptic, blood, and fear. Adam moved quickly, his mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. He knelt beside the first patient, a hulking Vormag whose mottled green skin was marred by dark, festering lesions. The alien's breathing was shallow, labored. No sign of infection from the wounds, Adam muttered to himself. "But these lesions, they're spreading from the inside." He glanced at the Elrian. "Have you tried a blood analysis?" The Elrian shook his head. "Our scanners were damaged in the attack. We're working with what we have." Adam cursed under his breath but kept his composure. He moved to the next patient, an Elrian soldier whose frail body was racked with tremors. Different species, different symptoms. This wasn't a conventional illness, it was something more sinister, and it was spreading fast. "Get me whatever medical supplies you have left," Adam said. "I need to start improvising." The Elrian nodded and hurried off. Adam stood up and surveyed the room, his gaze hardening. If they were going to survive this, they needed more than just medicine. They needed cooperation, something that was in short supply on Zephyr. As Adam moved toward a hastily constructed lab at the back of the medical tent, a shout from outside caught his attention. Two soldiers, an Elrian and a Vormag, were locked in a heated argument, their voices rising above the general din of the camp. The Zenarian, a centaur-like figure with a muscular upper body and horse-like lower limbs, pointed a jagged weapon at the Vormag, whose towering reptilian form loomed menacingly. Adam stepped out of the tent, raising his hands. "Enough!" he called out, his voice firm. The two soldiers froze, their eyes snapping toward him. "This is a medical camp," Adam continued, his tone brokering no argument. "If you want to fight, take it somewhere else. But if you're here, you're under my care, and that means peace." The Vormag hissed through sharp teeth, but after a tense moment, he lowered his weapon. The Zenarian did the same, though his gaze lingered on the reptilian soldier with open disdain. Adam knew this was only a temporary truce, but it was all he could afford right now. He turned back to the medical tent, where his makeshift team had begun assembling supplies, bandages, syringes, outdated scanning devices, nothing close to what he needed, but it would have to do. Adam set to work, drawing blood samples from the patients, isolating what little he could in the rudimentary lab. Time was running out, and with the plague spreading faster each day, Adam knew he was facing an impossible task. But impossible tasks were what he did best. The following days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion, surgery, and improvisation. Adam worked tirelessly, moving from one emergency to the next. He treated gunshot wounds, amputated infected limbs, and delivered babies in makeshift operating rooms. His assistant Sciencefiction medic named Kyle and a Korean nurse named Sirake were quick learners, but even they struggled to keep up with the constant influx of patients. Kyle's delicate bird-like hands were perfect for precision work, and Zyrak's insectoid exoskeleton allowed him to lift and move patients with ease. Adam had never worked with such a diverse team before, but necessity had forced them into an unlikely partnership. Together, they formed a fragile but effective unit, each one relying on the other's unique skills. The plague, however, remained a persistent enemy. Adam had managed to slow its progression in some patients using a combination of antibiotics and traditional herbal remedies provided by the locals, but it wasn't enough. Without proper diagnostic tools, he was fighting blind, and he knew it. Late one night, as Adam sat hunched over a stack of medical charts, Kyle entered the lab, her feathers ruffling with unease. "Doctor," she began hesitantly, "I overheard something today." "The aliens. They have a cure." Adam's head snapped up. "What?" Kyle nodded, her avian eyes wide. "I spoke with one of their soldiers. He let it slip that the aliens developed a cure for the plague weeks ago, but they're not sharing it. They're holding on to it for their own people." A wave of anger washed over Adam. He stood, his fists clenching at his sides. "That's not possible." "They would have told us." "They didn't," Kyle said softly. "And I think we both know why." Adam didn't need her to explain. The aliens were known for their technological superiority, but also their political maneuvering. They would protect their own at any cost, even if it meant sacrificing the other species on Zephyra. Adam's heart pounded in his chest. How many lives had been lost already because of their selfishness? He moved toward the door, but Kyle stepped in front of him, her wings spread wide. "You can't confront them, Doctor. If you do, they'll cut off what little support we have left." "I can't just stand by and let more people die," Adam snapped. "You don't have a choice," Kyle said, her voice quiet but firm. "If you go to them, this whole operation could fall apart. We need to find another way." Adam stared at her for a long moment, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him like a vice. She was right, he couldn't afford to lose what little cooperation he'd managed to forge between the species. But that didn't mean he was willing to give up. "Then we'll find the cure ourselves," Adam said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We don't need the aliens. We can do this." Adam returned to the makeshift lab, a storm of emotions surging within him. The aliens had a cure but kept it from the rest. His hands clenched into fists as he thought of the patients he had lost, the soldiers and civilians from different species whose lives could have been saved. But if he confronted them directly, Kyle was right, the aliens had the power to undermine the entire operation, and the tenuous peace in the camp could shatter. He paced the length of the tent, his mind racing. There had to be another way, a way to save lives without relying on alien technology or risking an all-out conflict between the species. His eyes landed on a series of herbal remedies stacked in the corner, brought by the local Zephyr healers in a desperate bid to help. Traditional medicine. It wasn't something Adam had considered deeply before he back on Earth. Modern technology and advanced pharmaceuticals ruled the medical world. But here, with almost no resources, he didn't have the luxury of ignoring any potential solution. Adam grabbed a bundle of the herbs and brought them to the lab table. He unwrapped the plant matter and spread it out, examining the alien flora with a practiced eye. There was potential here. The Zephyrians had used these plants for centuries to treat various ailments, and while their knowledge lacked the scientific rigor Adam was used to, their medicine worked on some level. Zyrak, I need you, Adam called to his Kalian assistant, who was tending to a patient across the tent. Zyrak's multi-limbed form moved with fluid precision as he approached. Doctor? Zyrak's voice was a soft hum, his compound eyes glimmering in the dim light. We're going to test these plants, Adam said, motioning to the herbs. I need to know what they can do. If the Elrians are keeping the cure from us, we'll make our own. Zyrak's antennae twitched, a sign of his unease. The Zephyrian remedies aren't tested on other species. It could be dangerous. It's already dangerous, Adam replied, his voice sharp. Every day we don't act, more people die. We can't wait for the Elrians to change their minds. Zyrak gave a low hum of agreement, and they set to work. Over the next several hours, Adam ran a series of tests on the herbs, extracting their active compounds and analyzing their effects on different biological samples from the patients. It wasn't perfecto without proper lab equipment. Much of what they were doing was guesswork, but Adam's experience and intuition filled in the gaps. As dawn broke over the war-torn horizon, Adam stumbled upon a breakthrough. One of the herbs contained a compound that seemed to neutralize the toxin produced by the plague. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it was something, an antidote that could slow the disease's progression, buying them time to develop a more comprehensive treatment. Adam wasted no time. He prepared a batch of the antidote and administered it to one of the most critical patients, a Kalian soldier whose exoskeleton had begun to break down from the plague. The soldier's breathing had been shallow, his eyes dull with fever, but within an hour of receiving the antidote, his condition stabilized. The fever broke, and his breathing evened out. It's working, Adam muttered, almost in disbelief. He checked the Kalian's vitals again, making sure he wasn't imagining things. The antidote wasn't a miracle cure, but it was a lifeline. Word spread quickly through the camp. Soldiers from all species came to the field hospital, some desperate, some hopeful, all of them looking for the antidote that had begun to show results. Adam and his team worked around the clock, producing as much of the treatment as they could with a limited supply of herbs available. It wasn't enough to treat everyone, but it was a start. As the day wore on, Adam was confronted with a new challenge, managing the expectations of the soldiers. The Vormix, Zonarians, Elrians, and other species didn't see eye to eye, and tensions were high as they all vied for the limited doses of the antidote. Fights broke out in the medical tents, soldiers accusing each other of hoarding or favoritism. The fragile peace Adam had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crack. He gathered the leaders of the different factions into the largest tent, determined to prevent the camp from descending into chaos. The Zonarian commander, a hulking figure with a deep voice, was the first to speak. "This is your fault, human," the commander growled, his four-hooved legs stamping the ground in frustration. "You distribute the antidote to your allies while our warriors die." Adam stepped forward, his face calm but his eyes hard. "I don't have allies here. I'm treating anyone who needs help, regardless of where they're from or who they fight for. If you can't see that, you're not looking." The Vormak leader, a massive reptilian with dark scales, hissed. "Then why are my people still sick while others get better?" "Because there's not enough to go around," Adam replied, his tone measured but firm. "I'm doing everything I can, but if we start fighting among ourselves, no one gets better. We all lose." The tent was silent for a long moment. Adam could feel the weight of their mistrust pressing down on him, but he refused to back down. He wasn't a diplomat, but if he could keep them talking, keep them focused on the real enemy of the plague, then maybe, just maybe, he could hold this fragile piece together. "We need to cooperate," Adam continued, his voice steady. "I need help gathering more herbs, more resources. If we work together, we can produce enough of the antidote to save lives. But if you turn this camp into a battlefield, "We're all dead." The Xenarian commander was the first to break the silence. He let out a low snort and crossed his massive arms. "I'll help gather your herbs, human. But if I find you hoarding the antidote for your own people, I'll burn this place to the ground." Adam met the commander's gaze without flinching. "I expect nothing less. Now let's get to work." Over the next few days, a strange alliance formed between the species in the camp. The Xenarians and Vormix worked side by side, gathering the necessary herbs from the surrounding countryside, while Adam and his team continued to refine the antidote. It was a race against time, yet the plague wasn't slowing down, and each day brought more patients to the hospital, more lives hanging in the balance. Adam barely slept, his mind constantly running through calculations, treatment plans, and supply lists. He felt the weight of every decision, every patient he couldn't save. But slowly, painfully, they were making progress. One night, as Adam stood in the quiet of the lab, his hands covered in dried herbs and antiseptic, Kryl approached him. Her avian features were drawn with exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "We've done it, doctor," she said softly. "The final batch of the antidote, it's working on all the species. It's not a cure, but it's close." Adam looked at the data on the screen in front of him, a wave of relief washing over him. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had done it. They had found a way to stop the plague. But there was still one more battle to fight. As dawn broke, the sounds of artillery fire echoed closer than ever before. The Vormach forces were on the move, pushing toward the hospital. Adam knew what was coming: another assault, another wave of destruction. The hospital was a target, and if they didn't act fast, all the lives they had saved would be lost in the crossfire. Adam gathered his team and the leaders of the various factions, laying out a plan to defend the hospital. They couldn't win the war, but they could protect the lives within the camp. As the Vormix advanced, Adam stood at the front lines with his team, ready to defend the place they had fought so hard to keep alive. The first explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending debris flying. Adam ducked behind cover, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't a soldier, he had never been trained for this. But he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let his patients die. As the battle raged around them, Adam moved through the smoke and chaos, treating the wounded on the front lines, dragging soldiers to safety, and patching up injuries as quickly as he could. His hands worked on autopilot, his mind focused on the task at hand. Then, through the haze of the battlefield, he saw something unexpected. The Xenarian commander, the Vormach leader, and even a few Elrians were fighting side by side, protecting the hospital from the invading forces. The species that had once been enemies were now united in a common cause. Adam smiled grimly as he stitched up a soldier's wound. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope for this planet after all. The battle finally ended as the sun set, casting an eerie red glow over the camp. The Vormix had retreated, and the hospital still stood. Adam collapsed onto a cot, his body aching with exhaustion, but his heart filled with a sense of accomplishment. They had saved lives. They had stopped the plague. And, perhaps most importantly, they had shown the galaxy that even in the darkest of times, different species could come together to fight for something greater than themselves. As Adam drifted off into an exhausted sleep, he knew his mission wasn't over. There were still battles to fight, still lives to save. But for now, they had won, and that was enough. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The low hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above Dr. Ethan Miles as he stared down at the wrinkled hand of his patient, the skin pale and lifeless. With a heavy sigh, he placed the patient's hand gently back on the bed and pulled the sterile white sheet over the still body. Another life lost, another soul that could have been saved if only the system hadn't failed them. Ethan stood in the doorway of the hospital room for a moment, watching as a nurse hurried inside to handle the grim paperwork. He didn't stay to see the tears of the family that would soon follow. He didn't have the stomach for it anymore. Too many lives had slipped through his fingers. not because of his medical skill, but because they couldn't afford the one thing that could save the Ama, a cloned organ. Organ cloning had become the pinnacle of medical advancement, the cure for what once seemed like inevitable death. Hearts, livers, lungs, all grown perfectly in a lab from a patient's own DNA. No risk of rejection, no need for endless medications. The technology existed, but only for those who could pay, and few could. BioSyntech, the pharmaceutical titan, held a monopoly on the technology, locking it behind impossible fees. They had turned organ transplants into a luxury, reserved for the wealthiest of the wealthy, while the rest of humanity was left to wither. Ethan had once believed in the system, in medicine's promise to heal. Now, it was nothing more than a business of death. Ethan moved swiftly down the hospital corridor, the sounds of beeping machines and hushed voices filling the space around him. Every step felt like a weight on his chest, each footfall echoing with the memory of the patient he had just lost. They had come to him, desperate, with hope in their eyes that he could somehow work a miracle. And all he could do was watch them fade away. As he pushed through the swinging doors into the cold night air, Ethan clenched his fists. He was done playing by the rules of this broken system. If BioSyntech thought they could profit off the misery of the sick and dying, then they had another thing coming. The back alley behind the hospital was dark, the stench of garbage and rainwater mixing in the air. A familiar figure stood waiting, leaning casually against a brick wall, his silhouette just visible in the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. "Rough day, Doc?" the figure asked, his voice a low murmur. "Rough doesn't even begin to cover it," Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. "We lost another one today, another one who couldn't afford the treatment." Marcus, the team's hacker, pushed off the wall and stepped into the light, his face partially hidden beneath the hood of his sweatshirt. "BioSyntech strikes again." "But you already know that." "So, what's the plan?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He had spent months watching patients die, waiting for the system to change. It hadn't, and it wouldn't. Not without a push. He turned to Marcus, his eyes sharp with purpose. "We're not waiting anymore. It's time to act." Marcus smirked, pulling a small tablet from his pocket. "I've got everything we need. Access codes, security systems, blueprints. We can hit one of BioSyntech's labs tonight, if you're ready." Ethan stared at the screen, the plan already taking shape in his mind. It was reckless, dangerous, and if they got caught, they'd be lucky to spend the rest of their lives rotting in a cell. But they were out of options. Too many people were dying. He wasn't just a doctor anymore. He was going to be a criminal, and he'd do it without hesitation. "I'm ready," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We all are." The warehouse where Ethan's underground team operated was a far cry from the sterile, polished walls of the hospital. It was grimy, cold, and filled with salvaged equipment, and most of it stolen or cobbled together from discarded parts. But it was here that they would do their real work, away from the prying eyes of BioSyntech and the corrupt government officials who turned a blind eye to the company's stranglehold on healthcare. Leila Torres was already there when Ethan and Marcus arrived. She stood over a metal table, examining a clone liver, its pale pink tissue glistening under the harsh overhead lights. "This is the last one we've got," she said without looking up. "Unless we get more soon, we're going to start losing people." Leila had been with Ethan since the beginning, a brilliant surgeon with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She had once been a rising star in the medical world, but after crossing paths with BioSyntech and exposing their shady practices, she had been blacklisted, her career all but destroyed. Now, like Ethan, she had turned to the underground, fighting for a system that had turned its back on them both. "We're going out tonight," Ethan said, stepping up beside her. "Marcus has everything we need. We're hitting one of their labs. We get in, grab as much as we can, and get out before they even know we're there." Leila glanced up from her work, her brow furrowed in concern. "And what happens when they find out?" "You know they're not going to let this slide, right?" "BioSyntech doesn't play nice." "They never have," Ethan replied. But I'm done sitting by while people die because they can't afford to live. We take the risk, or we keep watching them suffer. You know that. Leela stared at him for a moment, then nodded. Alright, let's do it. The Biosyntech lab was a fortress. State-of-the-art security systems, armed guards, and enough surveillance to make even the most seasoned criminal think twice. But Ethan and his team had an advantage. Marcus, the hacker, had spent months mapping out the lab's layout, learning its weaknesses, and figuring out how to bypass its defenses. Now, standing in the shadow of the massive building, Ethan could only hope that Marcus' expertise was as good as he claimed. Marcus tapped away on his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen as lines of code scrolled by. Give me a few more seconds. And we're in. The doors to the lab slid open with a soft hiss, and Ethan, Leela, and Marcus slipped inside, moving quickly through the darkened halls. The sterile smell of disinfectant filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of machinery. This was where Biosyntech kept its most valuable cloned organs, stored and ready to be sold to the highest bidder. Security's on a 5-minute loop, Marcus whispered, his eyes scanning the screens. We've got exactly 4 minutes to get what we need and get out. Ethan led the way into the storage room, his heart pounding in his chest. Rows upon rows of cloned organs were lined upon shelves, each one labeled and tagged with a price that made his blood boil. These were people's lives, reduced to nothing more than a transaction. Grab as much as you can, Ethan ordered, his voice tense. We're not leaving until we've got enough to last us a month. Leo moved quickly, packing the organs into insulated containers while Marcus kept watch at the door. Time was ticking, and the longer they stayed, the greater the risk of getting caught. Just as they finished loading the last container, an alarm blared through the building, red lights flashing across the walls. Shit, Marcus cursed, his fingers flying across the tablet. They've found us. We need to move, now. Ethan grabbed the nearest container and bolted for the door, Leela and Marcus close behind. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls as security guards rushed toward their location. Take the side exit, Marcus shouted, leading them down a narrow hallway. It's the only way out. They rounded the corner just as a group of guards appeared at the far end of the hall, their weapons drawn. Ethan's pulse quickened, adrenaline surging through his veins as they sprinted toward the exit. The doors burst open, and they stumbled out into the cool night air, the sound of alarms still ringing in their ears. We did it, Ethan panted, glancing over at Leela. We actually did it. Leela wiped the sweat from her brow, her eyes sharp with determination. This is just the beginning, Ethan. We've poked the hornet's nest. Now we need to be ready for the swarm. Ethan nodded, knowing full well that their fight was far from over. But tonight, they had won a small victory. And for the patients waiting in the shadows, desperate for a chance at life, that was enough. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, as the adrenaline began to ebb from Ethan's veins. They were back at the warehouse, the containers of cloned organs laid out on the cold steel table like trophies of a heist. Marcus was still catching his breath, eyes darting nervously as he scanned through security feeds, while Leela stared at the organs, a mix of triumph and anxiety etched across her face. This is enough to save dozens, Ethan said, his voice steady but low. Maybe more. Leela nodded but didn't smile. Maybe more, yeah. But you know Biosyntech won't let this go. They'll double down, tighten security, come after us harder. We've painted a target on our backs. Ethan knew she was right. The alarm had gone off too soon. Someone had been tipped off, or they'd been more prepared than expected. Either way, there was no going back now. This wasn't just a one-time job. They'd rattled the cage, and the beast inside would come for them soon enough. Marcus swiped a hand across his tablet, closing out the feeds. I'll change our digital footprint. They won't trace us tonight, but tomorrow might be a different story. We have to be smart about how we move forward, Leela added. We got lucky tonight, but next time, yeah, there won't be a next time like this, Ethan interrupted. his voice sharp. "We're not just playing defense anymore. We're taking the fight to them." Leela blinked, caught off guard by the sudden edge in his voice. "What are you talking about?" Ethan turned to face both of them, eyes alight with a fire he hadn't felt in years. "We've been reacting to them, hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But we've got leverage now. We don't just have organs, we've got evidence." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Evidence?" Ethan pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "While you two were packing up organs, I grabbed something else." "Craze files." The room went silent. Marcus's eyes widened, and even Leela's usually cool composure slipped for a moment. You what?" Ethan placed the flash drive on the table. "Craze been hiding something. I found encrypted documents, internal memos, stuff they didn't want anyone to see. It's all here." Marcus reached for the drive, his fingers itching to plug it into his tablet, but Ethan stopped him. "Not here. Not now. We need to be smart about this. If we're going to blow the whistle on biosyn tech, we do it the right way. We expose them, make it impossible for them to bury the truth." Leela crossed her arms, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "And you think this is going to work? You think exposing Craze's dirty laundry will change anything?" "This is bigger than one man, Ethan. The whole system is built to protect people like him." Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe, but it's a start. We show the world what they've been doing, sabotaging alternatives, blocking treatments that could save millions. We give people a reason to fight back." The room was thick with tension. Leela bit her lip, clearly weighing her options. She had seen what Ethan's idealism had cost them before, but there was a part of her that wanted to believe that this time, they could win. Marcus broke the silence, his voice low but determined. "I can crack the files. We'll need a secure server, a clean network, but I can do it. If we go public with this, it's war." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It already is." Days passed in a blur. Marcus worked night and day to decrypt the files, moving their entire operation underground, deeper into the city's forgotten tunnels where biosyn tech's eyes couldn't reach. Every click of Marcus's keyboard felt like the ticking of a time bomb. Meanwhile, the organs they had stolen were being smuggled to patients, transported in unmarked vans to the makeshift clinics that dotted the underbelly of the city. They saved lives in secret, every successful surgery a small victory in a war few knew was being fought. But it wasn't enough. Ethan could feel the weight pressing down on him with each passing hour. He didn't just want to save a few dozen lives, he wanted to change the system, to break the monopoly that had condemned so many to die needlessly. It gnawed at him, driving him harder than ever before. Finally, one late night, Marcus called Ethan and Leela to the warehouse. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a grim satisfaction in his voice. "I got it." Ethan and Leela crowded around his screen as Marcus pulled up the decrypted files. "It's all here," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've been blocking the development of self-regenerating tissue for years. They had the tech decades ago, but they buried it. They bribed officials, sabotaged research, everything to keep cloning as the only viable option." Leela's face drained of color. "All to keep people paying for organs." "Exactly," Marcus replied. "Craze's been at the center of it the whole time. But it's not just him, there are senators, regulators, even doctors who've been on their payroll. If we release this, we blow it all up." Ethan finished for him, his voice steady. Leela ran a hand through her hair, shaking her head. "And then what?" "We get rid of Cray, and another company steps in to take his place. We can't just destroy the AMO, we need to replace them with something better." Ethan nodded. "That's why we need to be careful. We release this, but we also give people an alternative. We leak the research on self-regenerating tissue, make it available to the public. Once it's out there, no one can control it anymore." Marcus looked up from his screen, a trace of admiration in his eyes. "You're talking about giving people hope again." "Not just hope," Ethan said, "a future." The plan was set into motion the following night. Marcus had hacked into the news networks, creating a secure path to distribute the files across every major media outlet. Ethan and Leela worked with underground contacts to spread the research on self-regenerating tissue, sending it to universities, independent labs, and anyone who could put it to use. It was a delicate operation. If they moved too quickly, Biosyntech would catch on and shut them down before the truth could spread. If they moved too slowly, people would continue to die, their only hope locked behind Biosyntech's corporate walls. The tension was palpable as they worked in silence, each step a potential misstep that could bring everything crashing down. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, Marcus hit the final key. It's done. Ethan's heart raced as the files uploaded, cascading across the internet like wildfire. Within minutes, the news broke. Headlines screamed about the corruption at Biosyntech, about the lives lost due to corporate greed. Social media exploded with outrage, with demands for justice. But it wasn't just the scandal that caught people's attention, it was the research. It was the hope that, for the first time in years, organ transplants wouldn't be a death sentence for those who couldn't afford them. The truth was out, and it couldn't be taken back. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion finally settling over him. We did it. Leela smiled, a rare, genuine smile. We really did. But even as they celebrated, Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. Biosyntech wouldn't go down without a fight, and the system that had allowed them to thrive wouldn't crumble overnight. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Still, for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to believe in a better future. A future where no one would have to die because they couldn't afford to live. And that, he realized, was worth everything. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The vast medical starship hovered in orbit over the planet Dreshaw, its sleek white hull gleaming in the light of a distant sun. This was the flagship of the Galactic Medical Fleet, a specialized force created to handle the most catastrophic crises in the galaxy: plagues, environmental disasters, wars. Wherever there was chaos, the fleet was the first to respond. On board, doctors, medics, scientists, and engineers worked tirelessly, deploying the most advanced technologies known to humankind and alien species alike. Dr. Ethan Vega stood at the observation deck, gazing out at the pale blue planet below. It was hard to believe that the peaceful-looking world was in the grip of a disaster. He had read the reports of a deadly virus, rapidly spreading, infecting not only the local population but also their machines. It was unlike anything he had encountered during his training. This was Ethan's first assignment, and though his heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and fear, he was ready to prove himself. Behind him, the door slid open with a soft hiss, and the sharp voice of Dr. Laura Kessler, the fleet's senior physician, cut through his thoughts. Dr. Vega, we've got a situation briefing in 10 minutes. You should be there. Ethan turned to face her, trying to mask his nervousness with a confident nod. I'll be there, Dr. Kessler. She didn't smile. Dr. Kessler never smiled. Her face, lined from years of hard-won experience, was a permanent mask of stern focus. She was a legend in the fleet, having led the response teams on some of the worst outbreaks in recent memory. And Ethan knew that, in her eyes, he was just another rookie, another young doctor fresh out of medical school with big dreams but no real-world experience. I suggest you take this seriously, she added before turning sharply and walking down the corridor. Ethan took a deep breath. This is it, he thought to himself. Time to prove that I belong here. The briefing room was filled with the hum of holographic displays and quiet conversation as the fleet's key personnel gathered around a large circular table. At the center of the table, a three-dimensional map of Dresh rotated slowly, highlighting key cities and regions affected by the outbreak. Captain Ralston, the commanding officer of the fleet, stood at the head of the table, his posture as rigid as the military uniform he wore. His gravelly voice silenced the room as he began the briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with an unknown pathogen, he said, gesturing to the holographic map. It's spreading at an alarming rate, and as of now, it's not only affecting biological organisms but also the eye systems on the planet. This is a dual threat scenario. Both organic and digital life forms are being compromised. Our primary objective is to contain the outbreak, identify the pathogen, and neutralize it. A medical officer stepped forward, her expression grim as she displayed images of infected individuals. Ethan's stomach turned as he saw the lesions covering their skin, their eyes wide with terror. The virus, which we're tentatively calling the Erexis virus, has the ability to infect both organic and synthetic systems. It appears to reprogram neural and digital networks, causing erratic behavior in both hosts. Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. A virus that could affect both living creatures and machines? It defied all logic. His mind raced with questions, but he remained silent as the meeting continued. Captain Ralston concluded the briefing with a warning. The planet's government is in a state of panic, and there are reports of rioting in several major cities. We'll be sending medical teams down to the surface immediately. Dr. Kessler, you'll lead the primary response unit. Dr. Vega, you'll be working alongside her. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had expected to be assigned to a secondary role, maybe assisting in one of the field hospitals. But working directly with Dr. Kessler? It was both an honor and a terrifying responsibility. After the briefing, Ethan hurried to the medical bay to prepare. As he pulled on his sterile gear and checked the status of his portable medkit, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. This was no ordinary outbreak, and if the reports were accurate, it was only going to get worse. The shuttle ride down to Dreshaw was tense. The team, consisting of Dr. Kessler, Ethan, a team of medics, and 2 engineers specializing in eye systems, sat in silence as the shuttle descended through the atmosphere. Outside the window, the once bustling cities of Dreshaw looked eerily deserted. Streets that should have been filled with people were empty, save for the occasional stray animal or malfunctioning robot stumbling through the wreckage. The shuttle touched down in the heart of Halaura City, the epicenter of the outbreak. As the hatch opened, the stench of decay hit Ethan like a wall. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance, he could hear the faint crackle of gunfire. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Dr. Kessler wasted no time. "We're setting up a triage center here," she ordered, pointing to a nearby building that had once been a hospital. "Vega, you're with me. The rest of you, spread out and start assessing the situation." Ethan followed her through the hospital's broken doors, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, the halls were filled with the groans of the sick and dying. Makeshift beds lined the walls, and desperate families crowded around the few doctors and nurses still working. The staff was overwhelmed, and it was clear they were barely holding on. Dr. Kessler moved quickly, barking orders and directing the team with precision. Ethan struggled to keep up, assisting where he could, administering medications, stabilizing patients, and running diagnostic scans. But no matter how hard they worked, the numbers just kept growing. More and more people were brought in, their bodies ravaged by the virus. And worse, some of the hospital's machines had started to malfunction, attacking patients or shutting down without warning. As the hours dragged on, Ethan's exhaustion began to catch up with him. His hands trembled as he worked on a particularly critical patient, a young woman whose body had been almost completely overtaken by the virus. Her skin was pale, her eyes unfocused, and her breathing shallow. "We're losing her," he muttered, glancing up at Dr. Kessler for guidance. But before she could respond, the woman's body jerked violently, her limbs twitching in unnatural movements. Ethan stepped back in shock. "What the question mark?" Dr. Kessler was already moving. "She's been compromised by the eye strand of the virus. We need to shut her down now." Ethan hesitated. "Shut her down? But she's still alive." "Not for long," Kessler snapped, grabbing a small device from her belt. "Once the eye infection takes hold, there's no saving them." Before Ethan could argue, she activated the device, sending a pulse through the woman's body. Instantly, she went still, her eyes closing as the life drained from her. Ethan stared in disbelief. There has to be another why a broken bar. Kessler turned to him, her face hard. This is war, Vega. You don't always get to save everyone. Now focus, we've got work to do. The harsh reality of their mission hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about healing, it was about survival. And if they didn't act fast, Dreshaw would be lost. For the next few hours, Ethan threw himself into the work. There was no time to think, no time to question. Patients came in by the dozens, and each one was worse off than the last. The virus was spreading faster than they could contain it, and the eye systems were becoming increasingly aggressive. At one point, Ethan found himself face to face with a malfunctioning medical droid, its once helpful programming now twisted by the virus. The droid's arms flailed wildly as it tried to administer a lethal dose of medication to an already fragile patient. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed a nearby scalpel and severed the droid's power cables, watching as it collapsed to the floor in a heap of metal. "This is insane," he muttered to himself, wiping sweat from his brow. But there was no time to dwell on it. The situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, and the triage center was becoming a war zone. Ethan's exhaustion gnawed at his body, but he pushed it aside. The triage center was overrun, and it felt like every second counted. Dr. Kessler's words echoed in his mind, "This is war." There was no time for hesitation, no time for second guessing. He moved from patient to patient, stabilizing where he could, making tough calls where he had to. The relentless hum of malfunctioning machines and the groans of the infected filled the air, a cacophony of suffering that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Just as he finished dressing a wound on a young boy's arm, a high-pitched screech pierced through the building. Ethan looked up, his pulse quickening. One of the hospital's central eye hubs, a towering machine designed to assist with surgeries, had gone berserk. Its mechanical arms whipped wildly through the air, slashing at anything in its path. Medical personnel and patients alike scattered, ducking behind overturned beds and equipment. Dr. Kessler grabbed Ethan's arm, yanking him down as a metal claw narrowly missed his head. "We need to shut it down before it kills someone." Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through his veins. "But how? We don't even know how deep the virus has embedded itself." Kessler's jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter, we need to take it off Linnea now." Together, they maneuvered through the chaos, dodging debris and the flailing limbs of the infected machine. Zara, the ship's eye specialist, appeared at their side, her face pale but determined. "I've been working on a way to disable the virus in isolated systems, but it's risky. If we hit the wrong circuit, it could fry the whole network." "Do it," Kessler snapped. "We don't have time to be cautious." Zara nodded, her hands moving swiftly over a portable console. She connected to the hub's central control unit, her fingers flying over the holographic display as she tried to find a vulnerability. The eye's movements grew more erratic, its arms slashing dangerously close to them. "Hurry!" Ethan shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the screeching metal. "I'm trying." Zara's voice was tense as she worked. Finally, with a sharp intake of breath, she hit a final command. The eye screeched one last time before it powered down, its arms drooping lifelessly to its sides. The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For a moment, it felt like they had won a small victory. But as he surveyed the destruction around him, at the broken bodies, the ruined equipment, he knew this battle was far from over. Kessler stood, brushing dust from her uniform. "We can't keep putting out fires like this. We need to take a more aggressive approach or this entire planet will be overrun." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "You're right. But what are we supposed to do? We don't even know where the virus originated, let alone how to stop it." Zara interjected, her face grim. "Actually, I might have found something. While I was in the system, I traced the virus's code back to a specific source. It's not natural if this was engineered. And based on the data I've uncovered, I think it was designed to target both organic and digital life forms. Ethan's heart sank. Engineered? By who? Zara hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Kessler. There are factions in this part of the galaxy that would benefit from destabilizing planets like Drusha. My guess is this was a deliberate attack, probably to weaken the planet before a takeover. Kessler's expression darkened. So this isn't just a medical crisis. This is a prelude to invasion. Ethan felt a surge of anger. We can't just let that happen. There must be a way to stop this. Zara nodded. I've been working on a hybrid protocol, a treatment that could neutralize both the organic and digital components of the virus. It's experimental, and we'd need to test it on a live subject before deploying it on a larger scale. Ethan didn't hesitate. Let's do it. We don't have any other choice. Kessler gave a curt nod, her eyes sharp with resolve. Get it ready, Zara. We'll need to run the trials immediately. For the next several hours, the triage center became a makeshift research lab. Zara worked tirelessly to refine the hybrid treatment, while Ethan and Kessler coordinated with the rest of the medical team to stabilize as many patients as possible. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Ethan like never before. This was more than just a medical emergency, this was a fight for survival, for the future of an entire planet. The first trial was conducted on a patient in critical condition, a middle-aged man whose body was being ravaged by both the organic and I strands of the virus. Ethan watched anxiously as Zara administered the treatment, his heart pounding in his chest. For a few agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the patient's vital signs began to stabilize. His breathing evened out, and the wild twitching of his limbs ceased. Ethan exchanged a look of disbelief with Kessler. It was working. But just as hope began to take root, a warning alarm blared from Zara's console. Her eyes widened in panic. Something's wrong. The virus is mutating. It's trying to adapt to the treatment. Ethan's mind raced. What do we do? If it mutates, we'll lose the only chance we've got. Kessler's voice was hard, unyielding. We need to act fast. Deploy the treatment across the planet now, before the mutation spreads. Zara hesitated. It's risky. If we don't neutralize the mutation in time, it could backfire. We don't have time for caution, Kessler snapped. Do it. Zara nodded, her hands flying over the console as she initiated the planetary-wide deployment of the hybrid treatment. Ethan felt a surge of fear and hope, his eyes fixed on the monitors displaying the status of the treatment as it spread through the infected zones. The minutes dragged on like hours, each second heavy with tension. Suddenly, the monitors lit up with activity. The virus was reacting, but not in the way they had expected. Instead of mutating, it was disintegrating. The treatment was working, breaking down the virus at its core. Across the planet, the infection was beginning to recede. Ethan let out a breath of relief, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. The planet was being saved. But before they could celebrate, a new threat emerged. One of the planetary leaders, secretly aligned with the faction responsible for the virus, had initiated a sabotage attempt. Explosions rocked the capital city, and chaos erupted as the traitor faction tried to seize control. Kessler grabbed Ethan's arm. We're not done yet. We need to stop this now. Ethan, Zara, and Kessler rushed toward the shuttle, their minds racing. They had fought so hard to contain the virus, but now the very people they had come to save were turning against them. It was a cruel twist, one that Ethan hadn't anticipated. But he knew they couldn't let the planet fall. In the capital, the fleet's forces clashed with the traitor faction, and Ethan found himself caught in the middle of a battle he hadn't signed up for. Armed with only his medical kit, he did what he could to tend to the wounded, while Kessler and Zara coordinated with the fleet to neutralize the insurgents. It was a brutal, chaotic fight, but eventually, the fleet's forces prevailed. The traitors were captured, their plan to sabotage the planet's recovery foiled. As the dust settled, Ethan stood among the wreckage, his heart heavy with exhaustion and relief. They had saved Russia, but at a great cost. The triage center was in ruins, the city was scarred, and countless lives had been lost. Kessler approached him, her face softer than he had ever seen it. "You did good, Vega. Better than I expected." Ethan managed a tired smile. "I had a good teacher." She gave him a rare nod of approval before walking away, leaving him to process everything that had happened. As the fleet prepared to leave Dreshaw, Ethan stood at the observation deck once more, gazing down at the planet below. He had come here as a young, inexperienced doctor, unsure of his place in the galaxy. But now, he knew this was where he belonged, on the front lines, fighting to save lives, no matter the cost. Just as the fleet's engines powered up for their next mission, a new distress call came in from a distant system. Ethan took a deep breath, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The galaxy's crises were endless, but so is the fleet's resolve. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Dr. Nathaniel Reyes stood at the mouth of the bunker, gazing out at the scorched remains of the once verdant valley below. The wind whipped up clouds of dust and ash, remnants of the relentless war that had left this remote planet, Vendros 9, in ruins. In the distance, he could hear the faint tremble of artillery fire, a grim reminder that the fighting was far from over. Yet, here in his underground emergency station, tucked away beneath the remnants of a collapsed mine, he had carved out a fragile sanctuary. Reyes wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and turned to step inside, where the cool, stale air of the bunker greeted him. The dim light cast long shadows across the makeshift beds lined with wounded soldiers. Some were unconscious, their bodies hooked up to rudimentary foredrips. Others groaned in pain, the result of hastily patched up wounds that Reyes knew would only worsen without proper treatment. But proper treatment was a luxury he no longer had. Medical supplies were running low, and the flow of injured soldiers both from his own faction and the enemy was relentless. He couldn't turn them away, not when their lives were hanging by a thread, regardless of the insignia they wore on their uniforms. This was the vow he had made when he first became a doctor, and it was the one thing he clung to as the world around him collapsed. "Dr. Reyes," came a voice from behind. He turned to see Sergeant Marco Ashford, his second in command, standing in the doorway. Ashford's uniform was stained with blood, though Reyes wasn't sure if it was his or someone else's. "We've got another one." Reyes sighed and motioned for Ashford to bring the patient inside. They had set up a crew triage system in the far corner of the bunker, and as Ashford carefully lowered the stretcher onto the ground, Reyes quickly assessed the injuries. The soldier was barely conscious, his face pale and slick with sweat. A jagged wound ran across his torso, deep enough to expose muscle and bone. "Enemy or ours?" Reyes asked, though it didn't really matter. "Does it make a difference?" Ashford muttered, but he answered anyway. "Enemy, Lieutenant, I think." Reyes knelt beside the soldier and peeled back the blood-soaked fabric of his uniform. The insignia of the opposing faction, a black eagle on a red background, was unmistakable. The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and Reyes could see the fear in them. "Help me," the lieutenant whispered, his voice barely audible. "I will," Reyes replied, more to himself than to the soldier. "I will." Hours later, the bunker was silent except for the steady beeping of the few functioning monitors and the soft hum of the makeshift generator. Reyes stood over the operating table, his hands slick with blood, his shoulders aching from the tension of the long surgery. The enemy Lieutenant Kiravos, as Ashford had learned from the man's dog tag, was still unconscious, but stable. For now, at least. Reyes peeled off his gloves and tossed them into a bin, then collapsed onto a nearby stool. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on him, but he knew there was no time for rest. There were still more wounded to tend to, and his staff was stretched thin. Ashford approached, his face a mask of disapproval. "We're not going to be able to keep this up," he said, crossing his arms. "You keep treating enemy soldiers like this, and word's going to get out. It's only a matter of time before both sides decide we're more trouble than we're worth." Reyes sighed, rubbing his temples. "You think I don't know that? But I can't just let them die, Marco, I'm a doctor, not a soldier. And what happens when the governor gets wind of this? Or worse, when the enemy commander finds out? We're sitting ducks here, and you're giving them all the ammunition they need to wipe us off the map. Reyes stood, feeling a spark of anger flare in his chest. I didn't ask for this war. I didn't ask to be stuck in the middle of it, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let politics dictate who lives and who dies. Not here. Not in this station. Ashford shook his head, frustration evident in his posture. You can't save everyone, Doc. Sometimes you've got to make choices, and right now, you're making the wrong ones. Before Reyes could respond, the door to the bunker swung open, and a gust of hot air rushed in. Standing in the doorway was a woman in a crisp military uniform, her expression as cold and unforgiving as the war-torn landscape outside. Governor Eleanor Tanis. Dr. Reyes, she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. We need to talk. The makeshift office where Reyes and Governor Tanis met was little more than a converted storage room, with a battered desk and a few chairs scavenged from the ruins above. The air was thick with tension as the governor took a seat across from him, her piercing gaze never wavering. I've been hearing rumors, Doctor, she began, folding her hands neatly on the table. Rumors that you've been treating enemy combatants in this facility of yours. Is there any truth to these allegations? Reyes leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. I treat anyone who comes through those doors, Governor. I don't ask for their allegiance, just their injuries. Tanis' lips curled into a thin smile. Noble, perhaps, but misguided. You're aware that this war is about more than just territory, aren't you? It's about survival, our survival, and every enemy soldier you save is one more blade poised against our throats. I'm a doctor, Reyes replied, his voice steady. My duty is to save lives, not to decide which ones are worth saving. Tanis tilted her head, studying him as if he were a particularly interesting puzzle. And how long do you think you'll be able to maintain this neutrality? How long before the enemy decides that your little sanctuary here is a threat to their war effort? How long before they send someone to burn it to the ground? Reyes swallowed hard. He had asked himself the same questions countless times. The answer was always the same: not long. I'm not naive, Governor, he said. I know the risks. But I won't turn away the dying just because they wear a different uniform. For a moment, Tanis was silent, her gaze never leaving his. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I can help you, Doctor. I can ensure that your station receives the supplies it needs. I can protect you from both sides of this conflict. But I need something in return. Reyes felt a chill creep up his spine. What do you want? I want you to prioritize our soldiers, Tanis said, her smile returning. I want you to ensure that our high-ranking officials receive the care they need, even if that means letting a few enemy combatants slip away. In exchange, you'll have the resources to keep this station running. You'll be able to save more lives. Our lives. Reyes stared at her, the weight of the decision pressing down on him like a vice. It was tempting, he couldn't deny that. With the supplies Governor Tanis was offering, he could save more people, provide better care. But at what cost? Could he live with himself if he started choosing who lived and who died based on their rank and their allegiance? I can't do that, Reyes said finally, his voice low but firm. I won't. Tanis' expression hardened. Then you're sealing your own fate, Doctor, and the fate of everyone in this station. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your choices. That night, Reyes couldn't sleep. He lay on his narrow cot, staring up at the ceiling, the governor's words echoing in his mind. He had known from the start that setting up this emergency station was a gamble, but now it felt like the walls were closing in on him. Supplies were running out, the wounded kept coming, and the pressure from both sides was becoming unbearable. His mind wandered to Lieutenant Kira Voss, who was still unconscious in the medical bay. She had been stable after the surgery, but her recovery was far from guaranteed. He had saved her life, at least for now, But what would happen if she woke up? Would she be grateful? Or would she see him as just another enemy, prolonging her suffering in the name of some misguided sense of duty? Reyes rolled onto his side, his heart heavy. He had spent years batching up soldiers, sending them back out into the meat grinder of war, only for them to return, broken and battered, again and again. At some point, it had to stop. At some point, someone had to draw the line. But where? The next morning, Reyes was jolted awake by the sound of gunfire outside the bunker. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding as he grabbed his medical bag and rushed toward the entrance. Ashford was already there, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he peered through a narrow slit in the bunker's entrance. "We've got trouble," Ashford said, his voice tight. "Looks like one of the enemy patrols is getting a little too close for comfort." Rey's stomach twisted into knots. "How many?" "A dozen, maybe more," Ashford replied, stepping back from the slit. "They're searching the area, probably looking for us." Reyes cursed under his breath. This was exactly what he had feared. If the enemy found the station, it was all over. They wouldn't care that he had saved one of their own. They would see the bunker as a threat, and they would destroy it. "We need to evacuate the wounded," Reyes said, his mind racing. "Get them out before the patrol finds us." "There's no time," Ashford replied, his eyes narrowing. "If they find us moving out, they'll gun us down before we get 10 feet. Reyes clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be. Before he could speak, a soft groan came from behind him. He turned to see Lieutenant Kira Voss stirring on her bed, her eyes fluttering open. She looked disoriented, confused, but alive. Reyes hurried to her side, his hands gentle as he checked her vitals. "You're awake?" he said, relief flooding his voice. Voss blinked up at him, her brow furrowed. "Where am I?" "You're in an emergency station," Reyes explained, keeping his voice calm. "I'm Dr. Reyes. I operated on you after you were injured." She stared at him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and suspicious. "Why would you save me?" Reyes met her eyes, his voice steady. "Because it's my job." Voss's eyes, a striking gray, narrowed as she tried to comprehend her situation. "You're from the other side," she said, her voice hoarse, yet sharp with accusation. "Why would you treat me?" Reyes wasn't fazed. He'd had this conversation too many times to be unsettled by the hostility. "Because it doesn't matter what side you're on in here. It only matters if you're alive, and I make sure that happens." She tried to sit up, but a grimace of pain crossed her face, and she sank back down onto the bed. "And what now? You keep me prisoner?" Reyes frowned and glanced toward Ashford, who was still watching the entrance like a hawk. The danger was too real, too immediate to waste time explaining the complexities of their situation. "No one's keeping you prisoner. You're free to go once you're able, but right now, you need rest, and we need to figure out how to get out of here alive." Ashford gave a sharp nod. "Patrol's getting closer, Doc." "We don't have much time." Voss's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was a flicker of understanding in her gaze. She was an officer, a fighter, and she knew when survival outweighed personal grievances. Reyes leaned down, his voice low but firm. "If they find us, they'll kill us all, including you. So you can help, or you can stay out of the way. Either way, we need to be ready to move, fast." Voss studied him for a moment before nodding, her face hardening. "What do you need me to do?" Before Reyes could respond, the unmistakable crack of gunfire echoed from outside, louder and closer than before. Ashford swore under his breath, tightening his grip on his rifle. "They've found us." "We're out of time." Reyes moved quickly to the wounded, giving sharp orders to his staff to prepare for an immediate evacuation. Voss, still pale but determined, forced herself up with a wince of pain. Her strength was nowhere near what it needed to be, but there was a fire in her eyes that couldn't be extinguished so easily. "Get ready to move," Reyes called out, already calculating their chances. They had to relocate deeper into the maze of tunnels beneath the bunker, hoping to lose the patrol in the confusion of collapsed mine shafts and forgotten passages. The problem was that they were still moving critical patience, and every second they delayed gave the enemy more time to close in. The tension thickened as the sounds of boots stomping on the barren ground above reverberated through the walls. They were close, too close. Voss gritted her teeth and grabbed a weapon from one of the nearby supply crates. "I'll cover the rear. You get them out of here, Raze." Raze looked at her, momentarily surprised by the offer. "You can barely stand," he said. But Voss shook her head. "I can still shoot. And if I can buy us time, I'll do it." Ashford gave her a skeptical glance but didn't argue. He knew just as well as Raze that they needed every possible advantage they could get right now. The group started moving, Raze helping a badly wounded soldier who could barely walk, while the others carried supplies and patients down the tunnels. The low, oppressive atmosphere of the underground passages made every breath feel heavy, but they pressed forward, deeper into the darkness. Shots rang out behind them, loud and chaotic. Voss had opened fire, and for a brief moment, Raze felt a flicker of hope. If they could hold them off long enough, maybe they had a chance. But hope was a fragile thing in times of war, and it shattered quickly. An explosion rocked the tunnel, sending a shower of dust and debris down from the ceiling. The sound of it reverberated through the narrow passage, deafening in its intensity. Raze instinctively threw himself over the wounded soldier to shield him, as the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. "They're using explosives," Ashford shouted over the noise, panic creeping into his usually steady voice. "They're going to bring the whole damn tunnel down." Raze looked back through the haze of dust. Voss was still at the entrance, firing with grim determination, but the enemy was advancing too fast. They had no choice but to retreat further into the collapsing network of tunnels. "Move!" Raze yelled, his voice hoarse. He grabbed the nearest patient and pulled them deeper into the dark. Ashford and the rest of the staff followed, their faces set with grim determination. They couldn't hold out here any longer. The sounds of gunfire were deafening, ricocheting off the walls as Voss continued to shoot, even as debris fell around her. She stumbled, her body weakening, but she didn't stop. Raze felt a pang of guilt, knowing she was buying them time at the cost of her own life. He wanted to go back, to pull her out, but he knew it would be suicide to turn around now. They had to keep going. He had to trust she could take care of herself. But then, another explosion rocked the tunnel, this one closer. Too close. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and suddenly, the ceiling began to cave in. "No!" Raze yelled, instinctively grabbing the nearest person and pulling them back. The tunnel ahead of them collapsed with a deafening roar, cutting off their escape route. Ashford swore loudly, staring at the rubble in disbelief. "We're trapped." Ray's heart pounded in his chest as he assessed their situation. The tunnel had caved in, blocking their path forward, and the enemy was still closing in from behind. They were out of options. Voss stumbled toward them, covered in dust and blood, but alive. She was limping badly, her breathing labored, but there was a fierce determination in her eyes that hadn't faded. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice ragged but strong. "There's another way out." Ray stared at her, hope flickering again. "Where?" Voss gestured toward the side of the tunnel, where a narrow, nearly invisible passageway led deeper into the mine. "It's risky, but it'll get us out of here if we move fast." Ashford hesitated, clearly doubtful, but Ray didn't need convincing. They had no choice. "Let's go," he ordered, helping Voss to her feet. They moved quickly, the group of survivors following Voss as she led them through the dark, winding passage. The air was thick with dust, and the walls felt as though they might close in at any moment, but they pressed on, driven by the desperation to survive. Behind them, the sounds of the enemy grew fainter, drowned out by the groaning of the unstable tunnel. But Ray knew they weren't safe yet. Not by a long shot. As they emerged from the passage, the dim light of dawn filtered in through a narrow crevice ahead. The air was fresher here, less suffocating, but the tension hadn't lifted. The war was still raging outside, and they were still deep in enemy territory. Reyes stepped out first, scanning the area. The horizon was painted with the fiery glow of distant battles, but for the moment, they were alone. "We made it," Ashford said, his voice laced with disbelief. But Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had escaped the immediate danger, but the war wasn't over, and neither was their fight for survival. Voss, still leaning heavily on Reyes, looked up at the sky, her face pale but resolute. "This war won't end with one victory or one escape. But we can still save lives, Reyes." Reyes nodded, his jaw set. "We'll find a way, somehow." As the sun rose over the war-torn landscape, casting long shadows over the ruins, Reyes knew that their journey wasn't over. There would be more battles, more lives to save, and more impossible choices to make. But for now, they had survived. And as long as they could keep moving, as long as they could keep fighting, there was still hope. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The hum of fluorescent lights above flickered, casting a dull, sterile glow over the operating room. Dr. Ethan Carter stood at the head of the table, hands steady as he guided the surgical tools with practiced precision. Sweat beaded on his brow, his mind wholly focused on the task at hand. A triple bypass. The heart monitor beeped in time with the rhythmic pulsing of his patient's heart, a fragile yet hopeful reminder of life. But Ethan's mind was racing. Despite his outward calm, he had been a surgeon for over a decade now, and the routine of these life or death procedures had become almost mechanical to him. He'd saved countless lives, repaired torn arteries, reconstructed mangled limbs, yet something felt hollow. Each victory in the war seemed to blur into the next, leaving a void where satisfaction once thrived. He hadn't imagined medicine would become this way when he first donned the white coat, but there it was, an emptiness he couldn't shake. Just as he made the final suture, a vibration at his waist pulled his focus away for a brief second. A message. His phone. Unusual. The hospital staff knew better than to disturb him during a procedure. He finished the suture, looked up at the anesthesiologist, and gave a curt nod. "Stabilized," Ethan said softly. The team around him relaxed in unison, as if releasing a collective breath. The patient was going to make it. Ethan removed his gloves, wiped his brow, and stepped back from the table, glancing quickly at the message flashing on his phone. "Urgent meeting. Report to conference room 314. The sender was blocked. No name, no identification." Ethan frowned. It wasn't the first time he'd received cryptic messages in the last few months, though most were easy to dismiss. This one, however, had a different tone and authoritative urgency that made his pulse quicken. The conference room was a sterile space, all white walls and polished steel furniture. It felt more like a corporate boardroom than part of the hospital. Ethan hesitated at the threshold before pushing open the heavy door. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't what he found. 4 people sat around a central table, their eyes fixed on him the moment he entered. 3 of them were dressed in dark, professional attire, serious expressions, no-nonsense stances. The 4th was different. He wore a silver-gray uniform, sleek and unfamiliar. His presence radiated authority, but not the bureaucratic kind. This was something else, something deeper, as if he carried knowledge that would change the course of events. "Dr. Carter," the man in the uniform greeted, standing up. "Please, sit down. We have much to discuss." Ethan remained frozen for a moment, unsure. His eyes flicked between the strangers and the uniformed man, trying to decipher the situation. Reluctantly, he took a seat. "You've been selected," the man began, his voice firm, deliberate. "We're offering you the opportunity to join an elite unit, one that operates outside the bounds of typical medical practice. What we do is confidential, but I assure you, it will challenge everything you know about medicine and time itself." Ethan blinked. "Time itself?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Humanity has developed the ability to travel through time. We've formed a team, the Space-Time Medical Team, dedicated to providing medical assistance in critical historical events that would otherwise suffer greater loss of life. But there are strict rules. We do not change history, Dr. Carter. We simply save lives. Ethan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the proposition settle over him. Time travel. This can't be real. It's very real, the man said, his gaze unwavering. We've carefully selected the best of the best. And you, Dr. Carter, are one of the finest surgeons alive. We need your skill. He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Imagine saving lives not just in the present, but across time. The Black Death, the wars of the future, earthquakes that claim thousands. You could be there, offering aid where it's most desperately needed. Ethan's mind whirled. The concept was ludicrous, and yet a broken bar something in the man's tone, in the way the others remained silent, watching him, told him this wasn't a joke. It was an offer. And he had to make a decision. If we do this, Ethan said carefully, we can't alter history. How is that even possible? The man in the uniform nodded. We have strict protocols. We work in secret, always in the shadows. We remove any trace of our presence, leaving nothing behind but healed wounds. It's a delicate balance, but we have the technology to ensure our interventions leave no mark on the timeline. Ethan exhaled slowly. The opportunity to save lives across history? It was overwhelming, yet enticing. How could he say no? When do I start? He asked, already knowing the answer. The hum of the time machine was unlike anything Ethan had ever heard. It wasn't mechanical, it was deeper, as if the sound itself resonated in the bones, vibrating through the fabric of reality. He stood inside the machine's chamber, watching the holographic display ripple with data. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, peering over into the abyss of time itself. Beside him, Dr. Myra Patel, a fellow surgeon and the STMT's lead medic, glanced at him with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, the first jump's always the weirdest. Ethan nodded, though his pulse pounded in his ears. His nerves were on edge, but the anticipation was undeniable. In front of him, the mission coordinator, clad in the same sleek uniform as the man from the meeting, keyed in the final details of their destination. First mission, the Black Death, 1347, Central of Europe, the coordinator announced, his voice crisp. Your objective is to provide medical assistance to plague victims while maintaining the cover of local healers. You will be equipped with antibiotics and tools that match the period as closely as possible. Remember, no interference with the timeline. Heal, but don't alter. Ethan swallowed hard. The plague. Millions had died in agony during one of the darkest periods of human history, and they were about to step into it. The time machine activated, and everything shifted. It wasn't like a sudden jolt or a rush of speed. Instead, the world around Ethan seemed to dissolve, bending and warping in on itself. One moment, he was in a sterile chamber. The next, the air was thick with the smell of death and decay. They had arrived. The village was a place out of nightmare. Bodies lined the streets, bloated and covered in blackened sores. The air was heavy with the stench of rot and despair, the cries of the dying echoing in every corner. Ethan's heart lurched at the sight. This was far beyond anything he'd ever imagined. Stay close, Myra said, adjusting the makeshift mask over her face. The team's uniforms were disguised beneath cloaks and garments that matched the era, giving them the appearance of traveling physicians. They moved quickly, setting up a temporary clinic in the shadows of a crumbling church. The antibiotics they brought were a miracle to the people of this time, yet though they could never know it. Ethan worked quickly, applying salves and performing incisions to drain the bows of infection. Each patient was treated with meticulous care, though the team was haunted by the knowledge that they could only save a handful. The plague was relentless, and their supplies were limited. Ethan found himself staring into the hollow eyes of a young woman, her face pale and gaunt. She couldn't have been more than 18. Her hand, cold and trembling, gripped his as he worked. Will I die? She whispered, her voice hoarse and frail. Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. The truth was cruel. He could save her, but the plague would continue its grim march through Europe. Regardless of his efforts, thousands more would die. Millions. No, he said softly, offering a gentle smile. Not today. The treatment worked, but only temporarily. The team had to move quickly, their presence already drawing attention from the locals. Word spread of healers who performed miracles, and soon the village priest grew suspicious. The last thing they needed was an accusation of witchcraft. Time's up, Myra said, her voice tense. We need to leave. Ethan nodded, his hands stained with the blood and filth of the past. They couldn't stay. They couldn't save everyone. As the time machine whirred to life again, transporting them back to the present, Ethan's thoughts lingered on the faces of those they'd left behind. Welcome back, the mission coordinator said as the team stepped out of the time machine, back in the sterile chamber of the present. Ethan's legs wobbled slightly, still adjusting to the shift. The weight of what they had just done and what they hadn't pressed heavily on his chest. How do you get used to that? Ethan asked Myra, his voice low. Myra shook her head. You don't. You learn to live with it. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. Ethan stood amidst the ruins of a future battlefield, his pulse quickening as the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the desolate landscape. The future was nothing like he'd imagined. Here, in the 22nd century, war had evolved into something unrecognizably machines against machines, I against humanity, and in between, bodies lay broken, their cybernetic enhancements only making the devastation worse. His medical bag felt heavier than ever as he moved through the wreckage, scanning the area for survivors. Dr. Myra Patel walked beside him, her face grim as she surveyed the scene. She had been on these missions long enough to know what was coming, but even she couldn't hide the unease that prickled at the edges of her composure. Over here. One of the medics called, crouching beside a fallen soldier whose chest had been blown open by some kind of energy weapon. Sparks still sputtered from the exposed circuitry woven into the man's ribcage, mingling with blood that seemed almost out of place in this dystopian future. Ethan knelt beside the soldier, examining the damage. It was a gruesome mix of flesh and machine, and the technology was far beyond anything he had encountered before. But flesh was still flesh, and he knew how to save a life. He injected a stabilizing serum and set to work, delicately separating the cybernetic components from the human tissue, hoping to stem the internal bleeding. Easy, Ethan murmured to the soldier, whose eyes fluttered open for a brief moment. The man's breath rattled in his chest, his augmented lungs struggling to function. Will we win? The soldier rasped, his gaze flicking toward the horizon where the battle raged on. Ethan followed his line of sight and saw the towering silhouettes of eye-controlled war machines advancing, their weapons tearing through what was left of the human resistance. Ethan paused, unsure how to answer. The truth was, this war wasn't theirs to fight. They were here to save lives, not change the course of history. But the weight of the soldier's question hung heavy in the air. You're going to make it, Ethan said instead, focusing on the task at hand. He wasn't here to deliver false hope about the war's outcome. He was here to save this man's life. The soldier coughed, a thin trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth. Ethan worked faster, his fingers steady despite the chaos around him. With Myra's help, they managed to seal the wound, patching the man together with a combination of futuristic biogel and the more familiar staples of surgical precision. He'll live, Myra confirmed, wiping sweat from her brow. But we've got to move. We're drawing attention. Ethan glanced around and saw what she meant. Drones hovered overhead, their red eyes scanning the wreckage. It wouldn't take long for them to zero in on the team's position, and if they were found, the mission would be compromised. Go! Myra shouted to the rest of the team. They grabbed their equipment and hurried toward the extraction point, where the time machine waited, hidden within the ruins of what once had been her hospital. Ethan lingered for a moment, his eyes fixed on the fallen soldiers they couldn't save. The faces of the dead human and cyborg ally Kia blurred together, each one a reminder of the lives that slipped through their fingers. They hadn't been on this battlefield for more than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. Back in the present, the sterile hum of the time machine faded, replaced by the silence of the return chamber. Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning against a cold metal wall as the adrenaline drained from his system. Each mission was becoming more and more difficult to reconcile. The idea that they could save lives, but never enough. Never all of them. He wiped his hands on a clean towel, but the grime of war seemed to cling to his skin, invisible yet ever present. "We did what we could," Myra said, sensing his unease. "That's all we can do." "I know," Ethan replied, though the words felt hollow. "I just wonder if it's enough." She didn't answer, and maybe that was for the best. There was no answer, really. The space-time medical team wasn't about solving the world's problems or stopping wars. It was about being a small light in the darkness, saving a few lives while the rest of history carried on, unchanged. The next mission came quicker than Ethan expected. He had barely returned home yet, if his sterile apartment could even be called that, when the call came. Another disaster. This time, it was modern-day San Francisco. An earthquake of catastrophic proportions had hit the city, and the STMT had been called in to provide emergency medical aid. Ethan barely had time to pack a few essentials before he was back in the briefing room, the mission coordinator running through the details with a clipped efficiency that mirrored the urgency of the situation. "Magnitude 8.5, the coordinator said. "The city's in chaos. Thousands of casualties. Your mission is to establish a field hospital and treat the critically injured while remaining undercover. We can't let anyone know who we are or where we came from." Ethan nodded, already mentally preparing himself for the devastation he was about to witness. Earthquakes were unpredictable, ruthless, and this one had hit one of the most densely populated cities in the world. When they arrived on the scene, the destruction was worse than Ethan had imagined. Buildings lay in rubble, streets were cracked open like jagged scars, and fires raged uncontrolled. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and the cries of the injured and trapped echoed from every direction. The team moved quickly, setting up a triage center in what had once been a parking garage. It was one of the few structures still standing, though it groaned ominously with every aftershock. Ethan worked tirelessly, stitching wounds, setting broken bones, and treating crush injuries as fast as his hands would allow. At one point, he found himself kneeling beside a young girl trapped beneath a collapsed section of concrete. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, her face smeared with dust and tears. Her leg was pinned, the bone shattered, and every time the ground shook, her scream cut through the chaos like a knife. "Hold still," Ethan said softly, trying to reassure her as he prepared a splint. The girl's wide, terrified eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, he saw his own daughter in her. It had been years since Ethan had seen her, his life too consumed by his work, by the missions that kept him moving through time and space, always away from home. "Is it going to hurt?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. "A little," Ethan admitted, carefully maneuvering her leg. "But I'm going to make sure you're okay." He gave her a local anesthetic, numbing the pain as best he could before setting the bone. Her small hand gripped his as he worked, and when he was done, she gave him a weak, tearful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, before the paramedics arrived to take her to safety. Ethan watched them go, his chest tight with emotions he tried to push away. This was why he had joined the space-time medical team, to save people who otherwise wouldn't have a chance. But each mission left a little more of him behind, and he wasn't sure how much more he could give before there was nothing left. The team returned to base after hours of relentless work, their bodies and minds exhausted. But there was no time for rest. Another mission awaited them, this time in an ancient civilization, one teetering on the brink of destruction. A volcanic eruption of massive scale was about to wipe an entire society from history, and they were the only ones who could help. Ethan didn't know how much longer he could keep doing this, how many more missions he could endure. But when the time machine activated once more, and the familiar sensation of the world dissolving around him took hold. He knew he wouldn't stop. He couldn't, because in the end, saving even one life was enough to keep going. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Dr. Emily Sinclair stared at the holographic projection spinning above her desk. A map of the galaxy, littered with countless infected planets, painted a grim reality. The dots of light marking the spread of the void virus glowed ominously, representing billions of lives hanging in the balance. She swallowed hard, her hands trembled as they hovered over the controls, but her mind was sharp, focused. This wasn't the time for fear, it was the time for action. A chime echoed through her small office, snapping her out of her daze. Dr. Sinclair, a voice crackled through the comms, "The Federation Council is waiting for you." With a steadying breath, she straightened her coat, grabbed her datapad, and stepped out into the brightly lit corridors of the United Human Federation's Medical Research Center. The air was thick with tension as she made her way toward the council chamber, knowing that every second she wasted meant more lives lost to the void. Emily had dedicated her life to understanding viruses, their structures, and mutations. She had fought some of the most vicious biological threats humanity had ever faced, but nothing compared to this. The void wasn't like anything she'd ever seen. It spread faster than any virus had a right to, and once it took hold, it ravaged its victims from the inside out. Within days, immune systems collapsed, organs failed, and the infected died in unimaginable agony. Entire cities were reduced to ghost towns within weeks. When the door to the council chamber slid open, Emily was greeted by a holographic gathering of humanity's most powerful leaders. Counselors, military officials, and planetary representatives sat in suspended chairs, their faces serious. In the center, Grand Chancellor Lara Dane, a woman known for her unwavering decisiveness, stood waiting. "Dr. Sinclair," Chancellor Dane began, "the situation has worsened. The void is now present on 15 planets, and there is no sign of containment." "You've been briefed on Helios Prime?" Emily nodded. "Yes, Chancellor, Helios Prime was the first known case. If I can get to the source there, I believe we can identify how the virus spreads, maybe even find a way to stop it." Dane's expression hardened. "The Federation is divided. Some factions are pushing for full planetary quarantine, even considering planetary annihilation. If we can't stop the virus, they want to make sure it doesn't spread further. We're running out of time." Emily's stomach turned. "Annihilation? You can't be serious. Millions of people are still alive on those planets. We can't. We won't." "Not yet," Dane interrupted. "But we need results. Fast. You'll be leading a team to Helios Prime immediately. A military escort will ensure your safety." "We need a solution, Dr. Sinclair. The fate of humanity depends on it." The weight of those words settled heavily on Emily's shoulders as she left the council chamber. There was no room for failure. If she didn't find a cure, humanity itself might face extinction. The Starlight Voyager hummed to life as it left the dock. Its sleek, silver body glided through the vacuum of space like a blade through water, and from the observation deck, Emily watched as the stars stretched into streaks of light. This mission was unlike any she had undertaken before. Viruses were predictable, mutable, but the void defied all natural logic. Captain Marcus Drex approached, his heavy boots clanking against the deck, a grizzled Federation soldier with a face hardened by too many battles. He was not the type to mince words. "We'll reach Helios Prime in 2 days, Drex said, arms crossed. "I don't have much faith in this mission, Doctor. We should be glassing the planet, not saving it." "Good thing you're not the one making decisions, then," Emily shot back. She didn't have time for pessimism. Drex smirked. "Let's hope you're right." The rest of the crew was a small but specialized team. Lieutenant Jax Rayburn, a hot-headed pilot with a reputation for taking risks, sat at the helm. Across from him, sat Dr. Ilar Vogel, a geneticist known for her unconventional methods. Emily had worked with Ilara before, and while their personalities often clashed, there was no denying her brilliance. As the team settled into the rhythm of the voyage, Emily's mind turned to the task ahead. Her datapad buzzed with endless reports, autopsies, infection rates, transmission patterns. None of it made sense. Viruses were supposed to mutate, adapt to environments slowly, but the void was different. It spread uniformly, almost as if it was programmed. Helios Prime, she muttered to herself. It all started there. The planet had once been a thriving hub of trade and innovation, but now it was the epicenter of a plague. Her only hope was to find something, anything that could explain the virus's origin. Helios Prime loomed before them, an eerie planet bathed in the sickly green glow of its dying atmosphere. The crew silently observed the devastated cities from orbit. Vast urban sprawls turned desolate ruins. The sight of abandoned buildings and empty streets chilled them all to the core. "This is what awaits every other planet if we don't stop this," Emily whispered. The descent onto Helios Prime was tense. The ship's scanners detected life signs of faint but present. Infected survivors, Alara guessed. They might still have useful genetic material. Useful or dangerous, Drex grunted. As the Starlight Voyager landed near a once bustling city center, Emily felt a wave of unease. The planet's silence was deafening. The team moved quickly, equipped with environmental suits and weaponry. Drex took point, leading them into the heart of the dead city. They searched through abandoned medical labs, crumbling research facilities, and makeshift quarantine zones. Bodies were strewn about, each victim showing the telltale signs of the void: skin blackened, eyes hollow, their very essence drained. Emily took samples, fighting the rising bile in her throat. This was more than just a virus, this was something far worse. In one of the labs, Emily found what she had feared: research logs dating back months before the outbreak. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, scrolling through the data. There were no reports of a virus like this until suddenly, boom, an epidemic. Viruses don't just appear out of nowhere. "What are you saying?" Drex asked, eyeing the surroundings. "I'm saying someone engineered this," Emily replied, her voice tight with disbelief. "This virus, it's synthetic." The revelation hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Emily's heart raced as she pieced together the implications. An alien bioweapon? If so, who created it? And why? The answers lay deeper within the planet, and time was running out. The team pressed on, following a trail that led them to the outskirts of the city. Emily's scanner beeped, detecting strange readings coming from beneath an ancient ruin. "Looks like we've found our source," she said, her voice strained with both excitement and fear. The ruins were unlike anything Emily had ever seen, massive stone structures, etched with symbols she couldn't decipher. The air buzzed with an almost electrical energy, as if the place itself was alive. In the heart of the ruin, they found a chamber filled with alien technology. And there, in a containment pod, was a sample of what Emily feared most: the void virus in its purest form. As she studied the pod, her datapad lit up with readings she could barely comprehend. The virus was far more advanced than anything she had imagined. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a sentient pathogen, designed to adapt and evolve based on its host species. No wonder it had spread so quickly across human worlds. "This is it," she whispered. "The key to stopping it." Alara, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly stepped forward. "And now the Federation has the power to do whatever it wants with it." Emily froze. "What are you talking about?" "The Federation isn't going to use this to stop the virus," Alara said, her voice low and filled with menace. "They're going to weaponize it." Emily's pulse quickened. "Weaponize it? That's not what we're here for." Alara's face hardened, her hand brushing the containment pod as if she were cradling something precious. "You think the Federation is only interested in a cure? They've been searching for a biological advantage for decades. With this virus, they can control entire planets, entire star systems. Imagine what this could do in the hands of military leaders." Emily stepped back, her mind racing. She had known Alara was unconventional, But this was treason. She glanced at Captain Drex, who had been silently listening, his brow furrowed in suspicion. "We need to destroy this," Emily said firmly. "If we don't, millions more will die." Drex nodded slightly, his hands tightening around his weapon. "I'm with the doctor. This thing is dangerous." Alara let out a short, humorless laugh. "You're both not A tilde Macron V. Do you really think the Federation will let you destroy it? They're the ones who ordered this mission. After all, they knew exactly what was on Helios Prime." She pointed toward the containment pod. "This isn't just a virus, Amalia, it's leverage." Before Emily could respond, the air around them crackled. A sharp whine pierced the silence as a group of heavily armed soldiers materialized around them, weapons drawn. They wore the insignia of the Federation but had no identification markings of Black Ops. "You're not taking this," Emily spat, stepping in front of the pod. The lead soldier, a tall man with a cold expression, raised his weapon. "This is classified Federation property." "Stand down, Doctor." Emily's mind whirled. The Federation had sent them here not to cure humanity, but to secure this virus for their own purposes. All those lives, all the people dying across the galaxy, and they were playing politics. Alar smiled faintly. "You see now, don't you? It's bigger than us, bigger than all of us." Drex, moving faster than Emily had expected, swung his rifle toward the soldiers. "No one's walking out of here with that virus." A tense standoff hung in the air. Emily could feel her heart hammering against her chest. She hadn't signed up for this. She was a scientist, not a soldier, but now she was caught in a battle she had never imagined. Her thoughts raced back to all the people she had lost to her spouse, the patients she couldn't save. She wasn't going to let their deaths be in vain. In a flash, Drex fired. The room exploded into chaos. Energy blasts ricocheted off the ancient walls of the ruin as the Black Ops team returned fire. Emily ducked behind a stone pillar, her breath shallow, trying to make sense of the situation. She wasn't cut out for this. How had it come to this? Through the gunfire, she spotted Alara moving toward the containment pod. Her heart skipped. "No!" Emily shouted, darting from her cover. Alara turned just in time to see Emily leap at her. The two collided, crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Emily struggled against her former colleague, her hands scrambling for the control panel on Alara's wrist. If Alara activated the pod, it would all be over. She couldn't let that happen. "I won't let you," Emily growled, her fingers curling around Alara's wrist. Alara sneered, but her eyes flickered with desperation. "You're too late." With a sudden burst of strength, Alara shoved Emily off her. Emily hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of her. She gasped, her vision blurring, but she saw Ida the pod's hatch opening. The sample of the void was exposed. Drex fired another shot, downing one of the soldiers before rushing to Emily's side. "We've got to get out of here," he growled, pulling her to her feet. Emily's mind spun. She glanced back at the exposed virus, its dark, swirling mass visible through the containment field. If it was released, there would be no stopping it. But if she could secure the sample, maybe, just maybe, she could still save humanity. "Cover me," she shouted at Drex, running toward the pod. Her fingers flew across the control panel, sealing the virus back inside. She felt a surge of relief as the containment field re-engaged. But it wasn't over yet. The Black Ops soldiers were regrouping, and Alara wasn't finished. A blast from Drex's rifle took down another soldier, but there were too many. They were being overrun. Alara stood behind the soldiers now, watching with a cold, calculating expression. "You can't stop this, Emily," Alara called out. "Even if you leave here with that sample, the Federation will take it from you. They'll do what's necessary for the survival of the human race." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "This isn't survival, this is genocide." A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. The ancient ruin groaned, stone walls cracking under the pressure. Emily's heart pounded as the structure began to collapse. Dust and debris filled the air as massive chunks of stone crashed around them. "Go, now!" Drex shouted, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her toward the exit. Together, they sprinted through the crumbling ruins, dodging falling debris and energy blasts from the pursuing soldiers. The ground quaked violently, and Emily knew they had only seconds before the entire structure came down. They burst out into the open air, the harsh light of Helios Prime's sun blinding them for a moment. Behind them, the ruin collapsed in on itself, burying the soldiers and the virus under tons of rubble. Emily gasped for breath, her lungs burning. Drex was beside her, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but he was alive. They were alive. For now. The Starlight Voyager hovered above them, its engines roaring as Jax prepared for a rapid extraction. Emily glanced back at the collapsed ruin. The virus was buried, but it wasn't destroyed. The Federation would dig it up, no doubt. This wasn't over. As they boarded the ship, Emily's mind raced. She had the data, the samples she needed to create a vaccine. But how could she ensure it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands? The Federation was already compromised. If they got hold of her research, they could weaponize it. But if she didn't act, billions would die. Drex sat heavily in the pilot's seat, wiping the blood from his brow. What now, Doctor? Emily stared out the viewport as Helios Prime shrank into the distance. Her decision weighed heavily on her. She had come here to save humanity, but she couldn't let the Federation turn this into a tool for control and conquest. There had to be a way to release the vaccine to the public, to make it accessible to everyone without letting the Federation manipulate it for their own gain. But first, she needed to create it, and time was running out. In the weeks that followed, Emily worked tirelessly in the Starlight Voyager's lab, using the alien samples to develop a vaccine. Every day, she felt the pressure of the Federation breathing down her neck, knowing they would come for her once she succeeded. Drex kept the ship on the move, dodging Federation patrols and bounty hunters sent to retrieve the virus sample. It wasn't long before Emily cracked the code. The vaccine was ready, but she couldn't trust the Federation to distribute it. She had to get it to the people, bypassing the political machinery that had turned this crisis into a power play. With Drex's help, she made contact with a rogue group of scientists and medical professionals who operated outside the Federation's control. They had the means to distribute the vaccine across the galaxy without the Federation's interference. But as they prepared for the final transmission, a message came through the ship's comms. It was Chancellor Lara Dane. Dr. Sinclair. Dane's voice was cool, controlled. We know what you've been doing. Surrender the virus and the vaccine data now, and you will be pardoned. Refuse, and we will hunt you down. You cannot win this fight. Emily clenched her fists. This isn't about winning, it's about saving lives. Dane's voice remained calm. And what do you think happens after you release this vaccine? Chaos, panic, civil unrest. Without the Federation's guidance, you risk destabilizing the entire galaxy. We are the only ones capable of managing this crisis. No, Emily said, her voice firm. You're not. You're the ones creating it. She cut the transmission. The decision was made. The vaccine was sent out to the rogue group, who would distribute it across the galaxy. There was no turning back now. As the ship powered down, Emily leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She had done it. She had saved humanity, but at what cost? The Federation would never stop hunting her, but she could live with that. She had done what was right. Drex sat down beside her, a small smile tugging at his lips. Looks like we're fugitives now. Emily chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Yeah, I guess we are. Together, they stared out at the stars, knowing that the battle was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of hope. The galaxy would heal, humanity would survive, and maybe, just maybe, they learned from this. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the gleaming towers of a near future city, where the sky was always a shade of amber from the smog of technological progress, Dr. Elena Walsh adjusted her glasses, her brow furrowing as she read the invitation from BioEvotech. The company, known for its cutting-edge advancements in medical biotechnology, was hosting a gala, and she had been invited. She wasn't sure if they genuinely wanted her there or if it was merely a ploy to neutralize her. After all, she had been an outspoken critic of their gene therapy programs, calling them elitist and unethical. But, curiosity piqued, she decided to attend. The event was held in one of the city's tallest skyscrapers, the BioEvotech Tower, a monolith of glass and steel that reflected the ambition of its founders. As Elena entered the ballroom, the air buzzed with the hum of networking, champagne glasses clinking, and laughter that felt far too rehearsed. She made her way through the crowd, catching snippets of conversations that only fueled her concerns. Words like immortality, superhuman abilities, and exclusivity floated through the air like forbidden fruit. Dr. Walsh, a voice called out, pulling her from her thoughts. Turning, she was greeted by the sight of Dr. Marcus Gain, an old colleague and friend turned corporate scientist. He smiled, though the light in his eyes was dimmed by something darker. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same, Marcus," Elena replied, offering a stiff smile in return. "Last I heard, you were deeply involved in the ethical side of research. Now you're working for BioEvotech." He shrugged, an uneasy gesture. "Times change, Elena. We're making breakthroughs that will change humanity forever." "For the wealthy," she countered. "And what about everyone else? What happens when this technology is only available to a select few?" Marcus sighed, a weary expression crossing his face. "You've always been idealistic. But the reality is, these advancements need funding, and the elite are willing to pay for it. In time, this technology will trickle down." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, unsatisfied with his justification. Before she could respond, an announcement echoed through the room, calling for the guests to gather for a demonstration. Marcus gave her a slight nod, excusing himself to join the other BioEvotech representatives. She followed the crowd, her skepticism mounting. The demonstration was held in a grand auditorium, and as the lights dimmed, a holographic display appeared. A charismatic executive took the stage, speaking in glowing terms about the company's latest innovation and advanced gene therapy that could enhance physical and cognitive abilities while extending human lifespan. The audience murmured with excitement, captivated by the promises of becoming something more than human. But as Elena watched, a cold unease settled in her gut. The presentation was flawless, but it was what wasn't said that troubled her. There was no mention of risks, no acknowledgement of potential side effects. It was all too perfect, too carefully curated. After the demonstration, Elena slipped away from the crowd and made her way to the outdoor terrace, seeking a moment of clarity. The city sprawled below, a labyrinth of lights and shadows. As she stared into the distance, her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from her phone. A message. Frowning, she opened it. Anonymous. "They're lying. There are consequences. Meet me at the corner of 5th and Ash tomorrow at noon." Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected pushback, but not this. Someone inside BioEvotech was trying to reach out. Someone who knew the truth. The next day, Elena found herself pacing nervously at the corner of 5th and Ash. The streets were bustling with people, oblivious to the shadow of corporate manipulation hanging over their heads. She checked her watch at 12:05. Whoever had sent the message was late. "Dr. Walsh," a voice said from behind her. She turned to see a young man, his eyes darting nervously. He was thin, pale, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm the one who contacted you," he said quickly, glancing around as if expecting to be followed. "Who are you?" Elena asked, keeping her voice low. "Why did you contact me?" "I work for BioEvotech." "Well, I did," he corrected himself, fidgeting with his sleeves. "I was part of the research team on the gene therapy project. They've been lying to the public. The therapy has a broken bar unintended side effects." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of side effects?" "At first, it works like they promised," he explained, his voice barely a whisper. "Enhanced strength, increased cognitive function, longer lifespan. But after a few months, the mutations begin. It starts with nausea, headaches, but it escalates, physical changes, neurological degradation. The people who've undergone the therapy broken bar, they aren't human anymore. Elena's stomach turned. Why haven't they revealed this? Why hasn't anyone spoken out? BioEvotech has been covering it up, the man said, his voice trembling. They've been a broken bar, eliminating the evidence. The people who mutate are taken away, never seen again. And anyone who tries to speak out a broken bar, well, let's just say they don't get a second chance. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. She had suspected something was wrong, but this was far worse than she had imagined. Why are you telling me this? Because I can't live with it anymore, he said, his eyes filled with desperation. You're a medical ethicist. You have a platform. People listen to you. You have to expose them. Elena nodded, though the weight of the task was overwhelming. What about you? Can you give me proof? He hesitated, then reached into his jacket, pulling out a small data chip. This has everything: a patient files, internal memos, video footage. It's all there. But be careful. If they find out you have these a broken bar. Before he could finish, his eyes widened in terror. Elena turned to see two men in suits approaching them with purpose. Run, the man whispered, shoving the chip into her hand. Without hesitation, Elena bolted down the street, her heart pounding in her chest. She heard the commotion behind her, but she didn't dare look back. Darting through the alleyways, she clutched the data chip as if it were her lifeline. By the time she reached her apartment, she was gasping for breath. Slamming the door behind her, Elena collapsed onto the floor, her mind racing. She had the proof she needed, but what now? Exposing BioEvotech wouldn't be easy. They had power, influence, and the resources to bury the truth. But she couldn't turn back now. Over the next few days, Elena worked in secret, poring over the data. What she found was worse than she could have imagined. BioEvotech had known about the mutations from the beginning. They had deliberately pushed the therapy forward, hiding the failures, in pursuit of profits. The patients who had undergone the therapy were no longer human in any meaningful sense. They had become something else, something monstrous. She reached out to her network of contacts, including a group of rogue scientists who had once worked at BioEvotech but had been forced out when they refused to compromise their ethics. Dr. Isabel Chen, the leader of the group, welcomed Elena into their fold, and together they began to form a plan. Their goal was twofold: expose BioEvotech's crimes and make the technology safe and accessible for everyone. But time was running out. BioEvotech was preparing to roll out a new version of the therapy, and if they succeeded, the consequences would be catastrophic. As Elena and the rogue scientists worked in secret, they were constantly looking over their shoulders. BioEvotech's security forces were relentless, and it wasn't long before they discovered Elena's involvement. Dr. Marcus Kane, now deeply embedded in the company, was sent to publicly discredit her. He appeared on news programs, painting Elena as a disgruntled former employee who was trying to sabotage humanity's greatest advancement. Elena watched in frustration as the media bought into the narrative. Kane, once her friend, had become her enemy. And yet, she couldn't help but feel pity for him. She had seen his medical records among the files. He had undergone the gene therapy himself, and though he didn't show it yet, the mutations would come for him, too. Elena's hands trembled as she closed the laptop, shutting off the stream of Marcus Kane's latest media appearance. He sat there, smug and confident, convincing the world that BioEvotech's gene therapy was humanity's future. Yet, she couldn't shake the images of his inevitable future, the mutations lurking beneath his skin, waiting to unravel him. She couldn't let him or BioEvotech win. Elena needed a plan, and quickly. The rogue scientists, led by Dr. Isabel Chen, had been working on a solution, an alternative gene therapy that would correct the mutations while maintaining the enhancements. The problem was that BioEvotech controlled the distribution network, the infrastructure necessary to make their version of the therapy available to the world. Without access to that, Isabel's team could never get their version out in time to stop the rollout. "We need to get inside BioEvotech," Isabel said, pacing in front of a whiteboard cluttered with diagrams and equations. "Their main research facility. It's the only way we can access the distribution system." Elena nodded, though the idea of infiltrating BioEvotech's headquarters made her stomach twist. The building was a fortress, guarded by advanced security systems and private military contractors. But there was no other option. BioEvotech was days away from launching their new version of the therapy, and if they succeeded, countless people would be at risk of irreversible mutations. The rich and powerful would flock to the new treatment, unaware of the horror they were signing up for. "What about Marcus?" Elena asked, her voice quieter than usual. "He's in deeper than I thought." Isabel paused, her expression softening. "You knew him well, didn't you?" "We used to be close," Elena admitted, sighing. "He wasn't always like this. He believed in what we were doing, helping people. But now a broken bar." "Now he's part of the machine," Isabel finished. "But don't forget, Elena, he's a victim too. That gene therapy in his blood is the same poison we're trying to fix." Elena nodded, though the idea of confronting Marcus again filled her with dread. Still, she had to focus. They needed to get inside BioEvotech, and they couldn't do it alone. "I think I know someone who can help us," Elena said. 2 nights later, Elena stood in a darkened alley behind a nondescript warehouse in the city's industrial district. The rain fell in a steady drizzle, soaking her clothes and making the night feel even colder. She pulled her coat tighter around her, shivering as she waited. Moments later, a figure approached, moving silently through the shadows. The man was tall, his face hidden beneath the hood. As he stepped into the dim light of the alley, Elena recognized him immediately. Dr. Victor Lang, one of BioEvotech's original scientists, and someone who had disappeared after refusing to take part in their later projects. "You came," Elena said, her breath visible in the cold air. "Barely," Victor replied, glancing around warily. "If they find out I'm talking to you, it's over for me." "I know," Elena said, stepping closer. "But we need you." "We're planning to break into BioEvotech, to expose what they're doing and get control of the distribution system." Victor's eyes widened. "You're insane. That place is locked down tighter than a military base." "I know," she repeated, her voice firm. "But you helped design their security systems. You know how to get in." Victor hesitated, his eyes flicking from Elena to the wet ground beneath their feet. "I can help you get in," he said slowly. "But after that, you're on your own. I can't afford to be caught in the middle of this." Elena nodded. "We'll take whatever help we can get." Victor handed her a small device, no larger than a credit card. "This will get you past the outer security layer. It's a skeleton key for the digital locks, but you'll still need to deal with the guards and the internal systems." Elena took the device, her heart racing. "Thank you, Victor." "You're doing the right thing." "I hope so," he muttered, before turning and disappearing back into the shadows. The night of the infiltration arrived quickly. Elena, Isabel, and a small team of rogue scientists stood in the shadows outside BioEvotech's towering research facility. Dressed in dark clothing and equipped with the best tech they could cobble together, they looked more like thieves than scientists. But this was their only shot. Elena's hand tightened around the small device Victor had given her. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Isabel nodded, her face grim. "Let's do this." They moved swiftly through the shadows, avoiding the roving security drones that circled the perimeter. When they reached the entrance, Elena held her breath as she inserted the device into the lock. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, The door slid open. They were in. The group moved quickly through the corridors, their footsteps silent on the polished floors. They had a map of the facility, courtesy of Victor, but that didn't mean they were safe. At any moment, a guard could turn the corner or an alarm could sound. But luck was on their side for now. They reached the control room, where the distribution network could be accessed. Isabel began working furiously at the console, trying to upload their modified version of the gene therapy into BioEvotech's system. But as the minutes ticked by, Elena felt a growing sense of dread. "Something's wrong," Isabel muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's a block in the system. I can't override it." Before Elena could respond, the door to the control room burst open. A group of armed guards stormed in, weapons raised. At their head stood Marcus Gain, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "Elena," Marcus said, his voice low. "I told you this would happen." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. "Marcus, please." "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," he interrupted, stepping closer. "You think you're saving the world, but you're just trying to destroy progress. This is the future, Elena, and you're standing in the way." Elena's eyes flicked to the gun in his hand, then back to his face. "This isn't progress, Marcus. This is a death sentence. You know what the therapy is doing to people." Marcus's jaw clenched, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "The therapy works." "No, it doesn't," Elena said, her voice soft but firm. "It's killing you. I saw your medical records. You're mutating, Marcus." "It's already started." For a moment, Marcus faltered. His hand shook slightly, the gun lowering an inch. But then, as if steeling himself, he raised it again, his eyes hardening. "Even if that's true, it doesn't matter. This is bigger than me, bigger than you." Elena took a step forward, her heart racing. "It doesn't have to be this way. We've developed a modified version of the therapy. It fixes the mutations. You can still help people, Marcus. You can still help yourself." Marcus hesitated, his gaze flicking to Isabel, who was still working frantically at the console. "You're lying." "I'm not," Elena said, her voice steady. "Let us finish the upload. It'll stop the rollout of the faulty therapy and replace it with a version that works. You don't have to die for this." For a long, tense moment, Marcus didn't move. Then, slowly, he lowered the gun. "Do it," he said, his voice barely audible. Isabel didn't waste a second. She completed the upload, overriding the block in the system. BioEvotech's distribution network was now under their control, and the modified gene therapy would be available to everyone, not just the elite. Elena let out a shaky breath, relief flooding her system. But as she turned to Marcus, she saw the toll the therapy had taken on him. His skin was pale, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," he whispered, sinking to his knees. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Elena knelt beside him, her heart heavy. "You can still make things right. We can give you the modified therapy." Marcus shook his head. "It's too late for me." Tears stung Elena's eyes as she watched him fade before her. She had lost him long before this moment, but the pain was still fresh. She stayed by his side until his breathing slowed and finally stopped. In the days that followed, BioEvotech's empire crumbled. The truth about the mutations was made public, and the company's executives were arrested. The rogue scientists worked with governments and international organizations to distribute the modified gene therapy to the world, ensuring that it would be safe and accessible for everyone. Elena watched from the sidelines as the world slowly began to heal. The divide between the rich and the poor would take time to bridge, but at least now, everyone had the opportunity to benefit from the technology. As she stood on her apartment balcony one evening, watching the sun set over the city, Elena received a message. It was from Marcus, sent before his death. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Don't stop fighting for what's right." Elena smiled sadly as she read the words, knowing that the fight was far from over. But for now, She had won a small Victoria for herself, for Marcus, and for the future of humanity. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Alara Thorne stood at the edge of the observation deck, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the view of the Interstellar Medical Academy. The station floated in the void, surrounded by an endless expanse of stars, each one a distant sun, home to its own systems, its own lives. The Academy was a masterpiece of architecture, a sprawling complex of sleek, metallic buildings connected by transparent tubes. Ships came and went, gliding in smooth arcs to dock at the various ports, ferrying students, supplies, and knowledge from across the galaxy. She had dreamt of this moment for as long as she could remember. To be here, at the most prestigious medical academy in the universe, was something she had worked tirelessly for. Her acceptance hadn't just been an achievement for herself, it was a symbol of hope for her family back on Earth, a sign that someone from their humble beginnings could rise to the top. Alara was a prodigy, a fact she often tried to downplay. Being labeled a genius from a young age came with its own set of challenges. She was often isolated, misunderstood, envied even. But here, at the academy, she hoped to find a place where she belonged, among the brightest minds of the galaxy. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching behind her. Turning, she saw her new friend, Rhea, gliding toward her. Rhea was from Syra, an aquatic planet known for its vast oceans and towering underwater cities. She had an ethereal quality about her, with smooth, bluish skin and wide, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She moved with a grace that was almost unnerving, as though she were swimming even when she walked. "You're going to miss orientation," Rhea said, her voice soft but amused. Alara smiled, turning away from the window. "I couldn't help it. This place is. It's incredible." Rhea joined her at the edge, gazing out at the stars. "It is, but it's also dangerous." Alara raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous?" "Not in the way you think," Rhea said, her voice lowering. "The competition here is fierce. Everyone wants to be the best, and some people will do anything to get ahead." Alara frowned, but before she could respond, another figure joined them. Cyan, the third member of their group, was from Utrax, a planet known for its cybernetic enhancements. He was tall and lean, with metallic implants visible beneath his skin, a mix of man and machine. Despite his intimidating appearance, Cyan was easygoing and quick to smile. "You two talking about me?" he asked, grinning as he adjusted the device on his wrist. It hummed softly as he checked the time. "We're talking about how you're always late," Rhea teased. Cyan shrugged. "I'm not late. I just arrive exactly when I mean to." Alara rolled her eyes, but there was a warmth between them that she hadn't felt in a long time. They had only met a few weeks ago during the Academy's entrance exams, but the bond between them had formed quickly. They were a team now, and Alara felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known she needed. The Academy was more than just a school. It was a battleground of intellect and ambition, a place where the brightest minds came together to push the boundaries of science. And Alara, Rhea, and Cyan were about to face their first real challenge. The lab was sterile, cold, and quiet. Rows of workstations filled with advanced equipment lined the walls, each one dedicated to the study of alien biology. The students, dressed in white lab coats, were focused, their hands steady as they performed intricate procedures on various alien samples. Alara stood at her station, her eyes fixed on the creature in front of her. It was a small, writhing organism, contained within a transparent box. Its skin was translucent, revealing the complex network of organs beneath, and it pulsed with an airy light. The creature was from a planet in the far reaches of the galaxy, known for its aggressive nature and unique biology. Dr. Lyra, their instructor, moved between the stations, her sharp gaze observing the students' progress. She was a tall, severe woman, her gray hair pulled back tightly, and her expression gave away little emotion. She was known for her brilliance and her ruthlessness, and her reputation preceded her. "Careful with that sample," Dr. Lyra said as she passed by Alara's station. "One wrong move, and it could escape." Alara nodded, her hand steady as she adjusted the containment field. The creature twitched, its light growing brighter as if reacting to her touch. "I've got this," she muttered under her breath. Beside her, Rhea was focused on her own experiment, her movements calm and precise. Cayenne, on the other hand, was frowning at his workstation, his mechanical hand whirring as he adjusted the settings on his scanner. "This thing's not responding the way it should," Cayenne said, frustration creeping into his voice. Before Alara could respond, a loud alarm blared through the lab, startling everyone. The lights flickered, and a mechanical voice echoed over the intercom. "Containment breach! Containment breach!" The students froze, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, chaos erupted. The creature on Alara's workstation began to thrash violently, its pulsing light growing more intense. The containment field faltered, flickering as the creature slammed against the walls of its enclosure. "Alara!" Rhea shouted, her voice filled with panic. Alara acted on instinct, her hands moving faster than her mind could process. She activated the emergency lock, but it was too late. The creature broke free, its translucent form darting toward her. For a split second, Alara's world narrowed to that single moment. The creature's light blinded her, and she felt a sharp pain as it grazed her arm. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the creature was gone, disappearing into the vents. Alara staggered back, clutching her arm as blood seeped through her lab coat. The room was in chaos, students scrambling to contain the breach, alarms blaring in the background. Dr. Lyra's voice cut through the noise. "Everyone, out of the lab!" Now, Alara, dazed and disoriented, felt Rhea's hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the exit. Cayenne was at her side, his face pale as he looked at her bleeding arm. "We need to get you to the med bay," Cayenne said, his voice urgent. Alara nodded, but her mind was racing. Something wasn't right. The creature's light, the way it had reacted to her. It wasn't just a containment breach. There was something more going on. As they hurried out of the lab, Alara glanced back at the workstation, her thoughts swirling. What had she just discovered? The med bay was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the lab. Alara sat on one of the examination tables, her arm bandaged, though the wound had already begun to heal. The medical staff had been efficient, treating her injuries with advanced healing technology. But even as the physical pain faded, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Rhea and Cayenne stood nearby, their faces etched with concern. "You're lucky it wasn't worse," Rhea said, her voice soft. "That thing could have killed you." Alara shook her head. "It wasn't trying to kill me. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like it was trying to communicate." Cayenne frowned. "Communicate?" "Alara, it attacked you." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But there was something else. When it touched me, I felt different." Rhea exchanged a worried glance with Cayenne. "Different how?" Alara hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. The sensation had been fleeting, but it had left an impression. When the creature had touched her, it was as though a door had opened in her mind, revealing something she hadn't been able to grasp before. She felt more aware, more in tune with the world around her. "It's hard to explain," Alara said finally. "But I think that creature was more than just an experiment gone wrong." Before Rhea or Cayenne could respond, the door to the med bay opened, and Dr. Lyra entered, her expression unreadable. "Alara," she said, her voice clipped. "I need to speak with you." "Alone?" Alara glanced at her friends, then nodded. "I'll be fine," she told them, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. Rhea and Cayenne left reluctantly, casting worried glances over their shoulders as they went. Dr. Lyra stood in silence for a moment, her sharp eyes studying Alara. Then, without preamble, she said, "What happened in that lab was no accident." Alara blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "The creature you encountered is part of a classified project," Dr. Lyra said, her tone cold and precise. "A project that goes beyond the scope of what you've been told." Alara's heart raced. "What kind of project?" Dr. Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not something I can disclose to you at this time. But I can tell you this. The technology you've encountered has the potential to change the very foundation of medical science." Alara's mind spun with possibilities. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a thrill of fear through her. "Change it how?" Dr. Lyra's gaze sharpened. "That's for you to figure out. You're one of the brightest minds in this academy, Alara. If anyone can unlock the potential of this discovery, it's you." Alara swallowed hard. The weight of Dr. Lyra's words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had always wanted to make a difference, to push the boundaries of science. But this was something else entirely. "What do you expect me to do?" Alara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Lyra's eyes gleamed. "Continue your research, but keep it quiet. There are those who would misuse this technology, and we can't afford to let that happen." Alara nodded, though her mind was already racing with questions. What had she gotten herself into? In the days that followed, Alara, Rhea, and Kyan worked in secret, delving deeper into the implications of the healing technology they had stumbled upon. The more they learned, the more they realized how dangerous it could be. Alara's initial excitement was quickly tempered by the ethical dilemmas that arose. The technology accelerated healing, but it came at a cost. The rapid regeneration altered the patient's DNA, making them more susceptible to certain diseases, and in some cases, it even caused mutations. The implications were staggering. If used correctly, the technology could cure diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. But if it fell into the wrong hands, it could be weaponized, creating soldiers who were nearly impossible to kill. The pressure mounted as word of their discovery began to spread. Dr. Lyra had warned them to keep it quiet, but rumors had a way of slipping through even the tightest security. Soon, other factions within the academy began to take notice. The Atraxians, known for their militaristic tendencies, were particularly interested in the potential applications of the technology. Kyan's mentor, Professor Sin, had been unusually attentive lately, asking questions about their research that made Kyan uneasy. Professor Sin's sudden interest in their work wasn't just unsettling, it was a signal that things were slipping out of their control. Kyan noticed the subtle hints in his mentor's words, the probing questions that dug too deep, the way Sin's usually casual demeanor had taken on a sharp edge. He didn't say anything to Alara or Rhea at first, not wanting to worry them, but the unease gnawed at him. He knew how the Atraxians thought, especially those with military connections, and the allure of a nearly invincible army was too strong for them to resist. Alara, meanwhile, was buried in her research, her mind constantly racing. She barely slept, spending every spare moment in the lab, poring over data, running simulations, trying to find a way to make the technology safer. The ethical questions kept her awake at night. She had the power to change everything or cure diseases, heal wounds that no current technology could. But the cost was too high. The unintended consequences of DNA alterations could spiral out of control. Was she playing God with lives she couldn't fully understand? Rhea was the only one who seemed to hold on to her optimism. To her, the technology was a gift, something that could revolutionize medicine. She believed in its potential to save millions, to end suffering across the galaxy. But even Rhea couldn't deny the risks. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that the technology wasn't just a medical tool, it was a weapon waiting to be unleashed. Their research had reached a tipping point when the Tyraxian Empire became involved. Tyraxia was known for its aggression, its desire for dominance. The moment they caught wind of the discovery, they dispatched a delegation to the academy. The Tyraxian representative was a tall, imposing figure named Darvik, with sharp, angular features and cold, calculating eyes. His arrival sent ripples through the academy. Everyone knew what it meant. Taraxia wasn't here for the betterment of science. They wanted control. They wanted to weaponize the technology, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. Alara had been summoned to a meeting with the Academy's Ethics Committee, along with Darvik and representatives from the Allied systems. It was a tense, formal affair, held in a star-white conference room overlooking the Academy's central hub. The air was thick with unspoken tension as the various factions sized each other up, each with their own agenda. Darvik wasted no time. "This technology," he said, his voice cold and clipped, "belongs to the galaxy. To withhold it would be a disservice to all sentient beings. Taraxia is prepared to offer the necessary resources to ensure its development and application." The Allied Systems representative, a woman named Ilna with a calm, measured voice, interjected. "The technology is dangerous. We've seen the preliminary data. The DNA alterations are unpredictable, and the potential for misuse is astronomical." Darvik's lips twisted into a thin smile. "Misuse? You speak as though we are children playing with fire." "Taraxia understands the risks, but we also understand the potential. This technology could save lives, or destroy them," Alna countered. "In the wrong hands, it could lead to biological warfare on a scale we've never seen before." Alara sat silently, her mind racing. The room had descended into a debate between two powerful factions, and her voice, the voice of the scientist who had discovered the technology, was being drowned out. She had never felt so powerless. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She had wanted to heal, to push the boundaries of medicine, not to create a tool for war. Her gaze flicked to Dr. Lyra, who sat quietly at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Alara knew that Lyra had her own agenda, though what it was remained unclear. She had been the one to encourage Alara to pursue the research in secret, to push the limits of what was possible. But now, as the stakes grew higher, Lyra's silence was deafening. After hours of heated debate, the meeting adjourned without resolution. The Taraxians wanted control of the technology, the Allied systems wanted it destroyed, and the Academy was caught in the middle. Alara was left with a sinking feeling that no matter what she did, someone would misuse her discovery. Later that night, as Alara sat alone in the lab, staring at the data on her screen, Kyan entered, his footsteps soft against the cold floor. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her, before finally speaking. "You know they're going to take it from us," he said quietly. Alara nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I know. They won't stop," Kyan continued, his voice tight. "The Taraxians, the Atraxians, even the Allied systems. They all want it, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. You can't trust any of them." "I don't know what to do," Alara admitted, her voice cracking. "This could save lives, Kyan, but I'm afraid of what it will become if it falls into the wrong hands." Kyan stepped closer, his metallic fingers resting on the edge of the desk. "We could destroy it." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She had thought about it, of course. The idea of wiping out all the data, ensuring that no one could use it for harm. But the thought of destroying something with such potential filled her with dread. "I don't know if I can do that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to," Kyan said, his voice firm. "If you don't, someone else will use it, and they won't care about the consequences. You know what Professor Zin is like. He's already asking too many questions. And the Taraxians. They'll weaponize it in a heartbeat." Alara closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I don't know if I can live with myself if I destroy it." Kyan's expression softened, and he knelt down beside her, his voice gentle. "Alara, you're the only one who can make this call. But you have to think about the bigger picture. You didn't come here to make weapons. You came here to heal." A long silence stretched between them, the only sound the hum of the lab's equipment. Finally, Alara opened her eyes and looked at Kyan, her heart heavy with the decision she knew she had to make. "We'll destroy it," she said quietly. Kyan nodded, but there was no relief in his expression, only sadness. They both knew what this meant. The next few hours passed in a blur. Alara and Kyan worked in secret, erasing the data, dismantling the research piece by piece. Every step felt like a betrayal of the very ideals that had brought Alara to the academy, but she knew it had to be done. There was no other choice. Rhea found them in the lab as they were finishing the last of it. Her wide, dark eyes filled with disbelief as she realized what they had done. You destroyed it?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Alara couldn't meet her gaze. "It was too dangerous, Rhea. We couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands." Rhea took a step back, her face pale. "You don't get to make that decision. This could have saved millions of lives, Alara. And it could have killed millions more," Kyan interjected, his voice hard. "You weren't there in that meeting, Rhea. You didn't see how close we were to losing control." This wasn't about medicine anymore. Tears welled in Rhea's eyes, and she shook her head, backing toward the door. "You betrayed everything we've worked for." "Everything." Alara felt the sting of Rhea's words, but she didn't stop her as she turned and fled the lab. The sound of the door closing behind her felt final, like a chapter in their friendship that had come to a sudden, painful end. Kyan rested a hand on Alara's shoulder, his voice soft. "You did the right thing." Alara nodded, though she didn't feel any comfort in his words. The weight of her choice sat heavy in her chest, and she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. In the weeks that followed, the academy moved on, though the echoes of the lost research lingered. The Tyraxians left in frustration, and the Allied systems praised Alara's decision, though she knew it was more out of convenience than true respect for her choice. Dr. Lior disappeared, leaving the academy without a word. Rumors circulated that she had joined the Tyraxians, but no one knew for sure. Alara suspected she would resurface someday, likely with another dangerous discovery in hand. Rhea never spoke to Alara again. She transferred to a different department, and though Alara saw her in passing, the rift between them was too deep to bridge. As for Alara, she continued her studies, though her heart wasn't in it the way it once had been. She had learned the hard way that science wasn't just about discovery. It was about responsibility, about knowing when to push forward and when to stop. One evening, long after the academy had fallen silent, Alara stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The weight of her decision still pressed on her, but there was a quiet strength in knowing that she had made the right choice, even if it had cost her everything. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her personal communicator. She glanced down at the message, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized the sender. It was from Rhea. The message was short, just a few words, but they carried the weight of a new beginning. "I found a way." Alara stared at the message, a small, hopeful smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Maybe their journey wasn't over after all. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the small medical bay as Dr. Maya Hargrove ran her scanner over the chest of yet another colonist. Her eyes flickered to the readout of abnormal calcium deposits in the bones, tissue degeneration in the muscles. The colonist, a man in his late 30s, sat with his head bowed, eyes hollow. He was one of the 100 or so who had arrived at Novatera over the past few years, full of hope and ambition. Now, he was just another victim of the inexplicable disease sweeping through the colony. Maya sighed as she put the scanner down and glanced at the nurse beside her. "Get him on the supplement regimen, same as the others. It'll slow things down, but we need more time." The nurse nodded and escorted the man out of the examination room, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts. This was the 5th patient today, the 20th this week. The symptoms always followed the same pattern of muscle weakness, bone fragility, organ failure. It was as if their bodies were giving up, collapsing from within. But why? Novatera had seemed like the perfect new start for humanity, a lush, resource-rich world in the outer reaches of the galaxy. Maya had been assigned to the colony 6 months ago, right after her medical residency on Earth. She'd been eager to make a difference, to serve on the front lines of human expansion into the stars. But now, she wasn't so sure. The colonists were dying, and she had no idea why. A sharp knock on the door broke her from her reverie. It was Governor Hale, the leader of the colony. His tall, imposing frame filled the doorway, his sharp features creased with concern. "Maya, we need to talk," Hale said without preamble. "This situation is spiraling out of control. We need answers, and we need them fast." Maya gestured for him to sit down, though she knew he wouldn't. Hale was not the type to relax. "I'm doing everything I can," she said, her voice tight. "We're running tests on the environment, the food supply, even the air. So far, nothing is conclusive." "Conclusive or not, we can't afford to lose any more people," Hale snapped. "You've seen the reports. The productivity is down by 30%. If we can't keep up with our quotas, Earth is going to pull the plug on this entire operation. We need to fix this before it gets out of hand." Maya clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. Hale was under pressure, she knew that. But so was she. "I understand the urgency," she said calmly. "But this isn't just about productivity. These are people's lives we're talking about." "Exactly," Hale said, his voice softening slightly. "And if we don't find a solution soon, there won't be any people left." After he left, Maya sank into her chair, rubbing her temples. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She had always known that working on the frontier of human expansion would come with challenges, but nothing had prepared her for this, a mystery disease with no clear cause and no cure in sight. The next few days were a blur of lab tests and patient evaluations. Maya's team worked around the clock, but they kept running into dead ends. They tested the water supply, the soil, the alien flora, but everything came back clean. There was no environmental toxin they could pinpoint. The disease wasn't caused by anything they could find on Novatera itself. One evening, as Maya was reviewing the latest batch of results in her cramped lab, she received a message from one of her colleagues, Dr. Allen, who was studying the colonists' genetics. "You might want to take a look at this," the message read. Maya frowned and opened the attached report. As she skimmed the data, her eyes widened in disbelief. There were anomalies in the DNA of the affected colonists, subtle mutations that hadn't been present when they left Earth. These mutations were accelerating the degeneration of their bodies, and they were spreading faster with each generation born on Novatera. "This doesn't make any sense," Maya muttered to herself. How could these mutations have occurred so quickly? Space travel could cause some changes in human biology due to cosmic radiation, but nothing on this scale. The colonists had undergone extensive screenings before they left Earth. Their genetics had been pristine. Her heart raced as a terrifying thought crossed her mind. What if this wasn't just a natural mutation? What if something on Novatera or in the colony's environment was triggering these changes? The next morning, Maya gathered her team for an emergency meeting. "We've been looking in the wrong place," she told them. "This isn't an environmental issue, it's genetic. Something is altering the colonists' DNA." The room fell silent as her colleagues absorbed the information. Dr. Allen, who had sent her the genetic data, spoke up first. "But what could be causing it?" "We've already ruled out radiation, toxins, and pathogens." Maya shook her head. "I don't know yet, but we need to expand our search. There's something here that we're missing." They worked tirelessly for the next few days, focusing their efforts on anything that could be linked to the genetic changes. They scoured the planet for signs of alien technology, unusual energy fields, or anything that might explain the anomalies. And then, they found it. Deep beneath the colony, buried in the rocky ground, was an ancient alien artifact. It had been overlooked during the initial scans of the planet because it was buried so deep, but now, as they excavated it, the artifact pulsed with a faint, rhythmic energy, almost like a heartbeat. Maya stood at the edge of the excavation site, staring down at the strange object. It was covered in intricate carvings, symbols that no one could decipher. The air around it felt charged, as if the artifact was alive in some way. "We need to study this," Maya said quietly. This could be the key to everything. But not everyone agreed. Governor Hale was furious when he found out about the artifact. "This is ridiculous," he shouted during a tense meeting with Maya and her team. "We don't have time to play archaeologist. People are dying, and you're wasting resources digging up some alien relic." Maya held her ground. "This isn't a waste of time. I believe this artifact is connected to the disease. We need to understand what it is and what it's doing to the colonists." Hale glared at her. "We don't need understanding, Doctor. We need results. I want you to focus on a treatment, not chasing after ghosts." Maya felt her frustration boiling over. "I'm doing everything I can, but if we don't figure out the root cause, any treatment we come up with will just be a band-aid. The disease will keep coming back." Hale's face darkened. "You have 2 weeks. If you haven't found a solution by then, I'm shutting this down." As the days passed, Maya and her team continued their research, though the pressure weighed heavily on them. They studied the artifact in secret, trying to unlock its mysteries. It emitted a low-level radiation that was unlike anything they had seen before, but it wasn't immediately harmful. Still, they couldn't ignore the possibility that it was affecting the colonists' DNA in some way. Then, Maya made a breakthrough. While analyzing the energy patterns emitted by the artifact, she noticed something unusual. It was transmitting a signal. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Maya worked late into the night, decoding the signal, and what she found left her speechless. The signal was a message, an ancient warning. The alien species that had once lived on Novatora had faced the same crisis as the colonists, a mysterious disease that caused their bodies to degenerate over time. They had left the artifact as a beacon, a warning to any who might come after them. The message was clear: the planet itself was altering their DNA, forcing them to adapt to the environment in ways that were unpredictable and dangerous. Maya's heart pounded as she realized the full implications. Novatora wasn't just a new world for humanity to colonize, it was changing them. The disease wasn't a disease at all, it was evolution, accelerated by the planet's unique properties. The colonists were being forced to adapt to the alien environment, but the process was flawed. The genetic mutations were unstable, leading to the catastrophic breakdown of their bodies. This realization hit Maya like a punch to the gut. If they didn't find a way to stabilize the mutations, the colony was doomed. Maya stared at the decoded message on her screen, her mind racing. The implications were staggering, not just for the colony but for humanity itself. If Novatora was accelerating evolution, forcing humans to adapt in ways they couldn't control, then the entire foundation of the colony was at risk. The genetic mutations weren't a disease, they were a forced transformation, and that meant any treatment would have to be just as radical. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion tugging at her. They didn't have time to fully understand what was happening. The colonists were dying, and she had to decide: pursue the genetic changes or find a way to stop them completely. Either option came with enormous risks. Dr. Allen's voice broke her concentration. "Maya, you need to see this." He handed her a tablet, his expression grave. On the screen was the latest genetic analysis of a colonist who had been undergoing treatment. The mutations had accelerated even further. His body was restructuring itself, the bones lengthening, muscle fibers changing in density. Maya's stomach churned as she scrolled through the data. "It's speeding up," she whispered. "The planet's environment is pushing the evolution faster than we thought." Allen nodded. "If we don't intervene soon, the colonists' bodies are going to reach a breaking point. We're talking days, maybe hours for some of them." She stood, pacing the small lab. "We need to find a way to stabilize the mutations. If we can control the process, we might be able to save them." "And if we can't?" Allen asked quietly. Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to. If they couldn't stabilize the mutations, The colonists would either die from their bodies collapsing or survive as something else entirely, as something no longer fully human. The next few days were a blur of intense research. Maya and her team threw everything they had into finding a solution. The artifact's signal contained fragments of information about the alien species' own attempts to control the genetic changes. They had created a rudimentary gene therapy that allowed some individuals to survive, though it came with a cost. Their descendants were no longer recognizable as the same species. Maya couldn't let that happen here. The colonists had come to Novatera for a fresh start, but they hadn't signed up to become something else entirely. Still, the clock was ticking. More colonists were falling ill, their bodies deteriorating faster than ever. The pressure was mounting, and Governor Hale's patience had run out. He stormed into the lab one evening, his face flushed with anger. "I gave you 2 weeks, Doctor, and what do we have? More dead colonists and no solution." Maya stood her ground. "We're close, I just need more time." "You don't have more time," Hale shouted. "The colony is on the brink of collapse. If we don't fix this now, Earth will cut us off. No more supplies. No more support. We'll be left to die here." Maya's hands clenched into fists. "I'm doing everything I can, but this isn't something that can be rushed. We're talking about fundamental changes to human biology. If we get this wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic." Hale glared at her, his voice low and dangerous. "You have until tomorrow. If you don't have a solution by then, I'll be taking matters into my own hands." After Hale left, Maya felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had always known that life on the frontier would be hard, but she hadn't expected it to feel so hopeless. She sat down at her desk, staring at the data on her screen. The mutations were too advanced. The genetic instability was spreading faster than she could keep up with. She was running out of options. Then an idea struck her. It was risky, dangerous, but it might be their only chance. If she could use the artifact's energy to trigger a controlled mutation in herself, she could test the effects firsthand. It was reckless, but it would allow her to see if the changes could be stabilized before subjecting the colonists to it. Maya took a deep breath. This was it. She didn't have the luxury of time anymore. If she failed, the colony was doomed. But if she succeeded, she might just be able to save everyone. She prepped the lab for the procedure, her heart racing. Alan, who had stayed late to help, looked at her with a mix of concern and disbelief. "You can't be serious, Maya. This could kill you." "I don't see another option," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "I can't ask anyone else to risk it, not without knowing it'll work." Alan hesitated, then nodded grimly. "I'll monitor your vitals." "But Maya, if something goes wrong." "I know," she cut him off. "Let's just hope it doesn't." The procedure was simple in theory. Maya had designed a gene therapy based on the alien species research, modified to human DNA. She would use the artifact's energy to trigger the changes and hope that her body could handle it. As she lay on the lab table, the cold metal against her skin, Maya closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. Alan activated the machine, and she felt a sharp jolt of energy shoot through her veins. Her body convulsed, pain searing through every nerve. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she thought she was going to die. But then, the pain subsided. Her body felt different, lighter, stronger. She opened her eyes and sat up, surprised at how clear everything seemed. Her senses were heightened as she could hear the faint hum of the machines in the background, the soft rustle of Alan's movements. "How do you feel?" Alan asked cautiously, watching her closely. Maya flexed her fingers, feeling the power coursing through her. "I feel good, really good." Alan ran a quick scan of her vitals, his eyes widening as he reviewed the data. "Your body's adapting. The mutations they're stabilizing." Relief flooded through Maya. It had worked. The therapy had stabilized her DNA, allowing her to survive the changes. She still felt human, but there was something else now, a subtle shift in her biology that made her stronger, more resilient. It wasn't just survival, it was evolution. Over the next few hours, Maya refined the therapy, making it safer for the other colonists. The process was still risky, but it was their best shot. She worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that time was running out. Hale had made good on his threat. He had already begun shutting down non-essential systems, preparing to evacuate the colony if necessary. But Maya wasn't going to let that happen. The following morning, she gathered the colonists in the central hub. They were scared, anxious, many of them already showing advanced signs of the disease. Maya stood before them, explaining the situation at the alien artifact, the genetic changes, the therapy she had developed. "It's not a cure," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "But it's a chance to survive." There was silence, then murmurs of uncertainty. Some of the colonists were hesitant, fearful of what the therapy might do to them. Others, desperate for hope, were willing to take the risk. Governor Hale stood at the back, his arms crossed, watching her with a skeptical gaze. Maya took a deep breath. "I'll go first," she said. "Again, I've already undergone the treatment, and I'm still standing here. If anyone has doubts, I'll do it again. But I believe this is our only chance to save the colony." One by one, the colonists stepped forward. The process was grueling, each person undergoing the same pain and uncertainty that Maya had felt. But as the hours passed, the therapy began to work. The mutations stabilized, their bodies adapting to the changes. Maya watched in relief as the colonists slowly regained their strength, their once weak bodies now thriving in Novator's alien environment. They were still human, but they were something more now, as something stronger, more resilient. They had become the next step in human evolution. As the last colonist finished the procedure, Maya collapsed into a chair, exhausted but triumphant. The colony had been saved, but the future remained uncertain. They had survived, but they had changed. And now, they would have to face the consequences of those changes. Maya gazed out at the horizon, the twin suns of Novator casting long shadows across the landscape. The colony would endure, but what kind of future lay ahead for these new humans? She didn't have the answers, but for now, it was enough to know that they had survived. And survival, she realized, was only the beginning. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. In the cold expanse of space, where silence reigned supreme and the only movement came from distant celestial bodies, the galactic frontier station was a testament to human ingenuity. A sprawling space station orbiting a forgotten planet, it was a hub for research, tourism, and exploration. It was also a symbol of humanity's reliance on advanced technology, especially the cutting-edge bionic systems that had become an integral part of everyday life. Among its inhabitants was Dr. Ethan Ward, a man who was not entirely human anymore. Ethan stared at his reflection in the medical bay mirror. His face appeared tired, with shadows under his eyes, but the real fatigue lay deep within. The quiet hum of his bionic heart was a constant reminder of the price he had paid for survival. His left arm, too, was a marvel of bionic engineering, as smooth and seamless, its movements mimicking the real thing with uncanny precision. But it was his mind, enhanced with neural implants, that set him apart from others. The implants allowed him to process information faster, make split-second decisions, and multitask like no ordinary human could. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The day had been long, filled with routine medical checkups and minor emergencies, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was an uneasy tension in the air, one that Ethan couldn't shake. Something felt off, like the calm before a storm. His communicator beeped, breaking his reverie. It was Nova, the eye that ran most of the station's systems. "Dr. Ward, Commander Kane requests your presence in the control room. It seems urgent." Ethan frowned. Commander Tobias Kane was not the kind of man to make idle requests. He was a traditionalist, one of the few who distrusted the growing influence of bionic technology. Their relationship had always been strained, with Kane frequently questioning the reliability of Ethan's bionic team. "On my way," Ethan replied, slipping on his medical coat as he headed for the door. As he walked through the station's corridors, the low hum of machinery and the soft glow of the overhead lights gave the illusion of peace. But beneath that, Ethan knew the station was a complex web of interconnected systems, all vulnerable to failure if something went wrong. When he reached the control room, Kane was standing by the large observation window, his arms crossed, staring out into the void. Zora Blake, Ethan's second in command, was there as well, her bionic arm glinting under the harsh lights. "You wanted to see me?" Ethan asked, his voice neutral. Kane turned, his face a mask of barely concealed frustration. "We've been getting some irregular readings from the station's systems. Power fluctuations, minor glitches. Nova has been working to fix them, but I'm concerned it might be a sign of something bigger." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And you think it's related to the bionics?" Kane's jaw tightened. "I don't know, but with all the bionic enhancements on this station, it's a possibility we can't ignore. I want you and your team ready for anything. If those systems start failing, we could be looking at a catastrophic situation." Ethan exchanged a glance with Zara, who shrugged slightly. She was used to Kane's paranoia about bionics, but even she seemed on edge today. "We'll run diagnostics on our equipment," Ethan said calmly. "But I don't think bionics are the issue here. This station has been running for years without any major problems." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Just make sure your team is ready. If things go south, I'm not risking this station's integrity because of a malfunction in one of your people." With that, Kane turned back to the window, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. As they left the control room, Zara shook her head. "He's never going to trust us, you know that, right?" Ethan sighed. "I know. But it doesn't matter. We've got a job to do, and we'll do it. Keep an eye on the diagnostics." "I don't like this talk of glitches." Zara nodded and peeled off toward the engineering bay while Ethan returned to the medical wing. He spent the next few hours reviewing reports, his mind wandering to the nagging feeling of impending disaster. He was just finishing up when the station's alarms blared to life. "Attention, all personnel. This is not a drill. We are experiencing a critical systems failure. All hands to emergency stations." Ethan's heart skipped a beat, his bionic heart immediately compensating. He grabbed his communicator. "Nova, report." Nova's calm, synthesized voice came through. "Dr. Ward, we've sustained a massive impact from a solar flare. Several systems are offline, including life support in some sections. There are thousands of passengers trapped." "Damn it," Ethan muttered. "Deploy the bionic rescue team. We need to get to the affected areas now." He rushed out of the medical bay, meeting Zara and the rest of the team at the central hub. Each member of the bionic rescue team was equipped with advanced enhancements to superhuman strength, reflexes, and specialized medical tools built into their bodies. They were humanity's best hope in situations like this. "What's the status?" Ethan asked as he strapped on his gear. "Multiple breaches in the outer hull," Zara reported. "Life support's failing in 3 sections. We've got fires in 2 more, and communication with the lower decks is spotty at best." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. "All right, split the team. Zara, take half and secure the life support systems. I'll leave the rest to the lower decks and get those people out." Zara hesitated. "Ethan, you're harder." "I'll be fine," he cut her off. "We don't have time to waste." With that, the team split up, each member heading toward their designated areas. Ethan's group made their way to the lower decks, where the situation was dire. The station's corridors were filled with smoke, and the air was thin. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, some unconscious, others barely clinging to life. Ethan's neural implants kicked into overdrive, analyzing each person's vitals in a split second. He directed his team to administer emergency care while he moved from one passenger to the next, stabilizing them as best he could. But as they worked, Ethan's bionic systems began to falter. His heart stuttered, sending a sharp pain through his chest. He gritted his teeth, ignoring it. Now was not the time to show weakness. Ethan, one of his teammates, called. "We've got a major problem. The core is destabilizing. If we don't fix it soon, the whole station's going to blow." Ethan cursed under his breath. "Zara, do you copy?" Her voice crackled through the communicator. "Barely." "What's going on down there?" "The core's failing. We need to get it stabilized, or we're all dead." There was a pause, then Zara's voice came through, more steady. "I'm on it. Just hold things together until I get there." Ethan could feel his body betraying him as the bionic heart continued to malfunction. His vision blurred for a moment, but he shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. His communicator beeped again. This time, it was Nova. "Dr. Ward, I must inform you that the solar flare has caused significant damage to my systems as well. I am unable to maintain full control of the station's operations." "Damn it, Nova, I need you," Ethan snapped, the pressure mounting. "I will do what I can," Nova replied, her voice tinged with an unsettling hint of vulnerability. Ethan gritted his teeth. It was a race against time. His body was failing, the station was on the brink of destruction, and the only thing standing between thousands of lives and death was a man who could barely keep himself together. But failure wasn't an option. Ethan moved as fast as his failing body allowed, pushing through the corridors to get to the control room overseeing the core. The air was thin, making it hard to breathe, but his implants filtered out the worst of the toxins. As he passed by more injured passengers, his mind screamed at him to stop and help, but he couldn't. Not yet. The station's core had to be stabilized first, or there would be no one left to save. Nova's voice crackled again in his earpiece. "Dr. Ward, I have temporarily restored partial control to the core systems, but the damage is severe. You must reroute power manually from the auxiliary controls to avoid a catastrophic meltdown." Ethan knew what that meant. They needed to get into the reactor's most dangerous section. It wasn't just radiation, there would be intense heat, volatile fuel leaks, and God knows what else. It would be a death trap for anyone without serious protection. He finally reached the reactor control bay and found Zara already there, her bionic arm elbow deep in a control panel, sparks flying around her. "This thing's a mess," she grunted as she yanked out a fried circuit board. "We've lost 2 of the stabilizers. We're going to have to reroute power and balance the load on the remaining 2. "Can we do it in time?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "We don't have a choice," Zara replied. "You're not looking so hot yourself." "How's your ticker holding up?" "It'll last long enough to get this done," Ethan said, though the pain in his chest suggested otherwise. His vision blurred again as he tapped into his neural implants, pulling up schematics of the core systems. Together, they began working on the reroute, fingers moving with precision despite the chaos around them. Ethan's mind was focused on one thing: keeping the core from melting down. Every second counted. Every wire they reconnected, every panel they fixed, felt like a small victory in a war they were barely winning. Ethan's breath was ragged, and his heart skipped another beat. He ignored it, sweat pouring down his face. He didn't have time to think about what would happen if his heart failed him now. There were still thousands of people depending on him, and he couldn't let them down. Zara worked in silence beside him, her face a mask of concentration. The tension between them wasn't just about the mission anymore, it was about survival. They had been in situations like this before, but nothing as critical as this. Ethan felt the weight of every decision on his shoulders, knowing that one wrong move could send the entire station spiraling into oblivion. Suddenly, Nova's voice cut through the silence. "Warning. Core temperature rising. Reactor breach imminent if power is not stabilized within 3 minutes. Zara cursed under her breath. "We're running out of time." Ethan's mind raced. They were almost done, but not quite. He knew there was one more step, one more reroute that would give them the extra stability they needed. But his hands were shaking, and his vision was growing dim. "I'll do it," Zara said, seeing his struggle. "Just tell me what to connect." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "I've got this." He reached out, grabbing the final connection wire with his trembling hand. His heart was beating erratically, each pulse a jolt of pain. But he forced himself to focus. Just one more wire, one more connection. That was all it would take. His fingers found the port, and with a final surge of effort, he locked the wire into place. The control room lights flickered, and for a moment, it felt like the whole station held its breath. Then the core's temperature monitor began to drop, and Nova's voice returned, steadier this time. Core stabilization confirmed. Reactor breach averted. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. Zara called him before he could fall, her bionic arm holding him up. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with equal parts relief and admiration. "We did it," Ethan corrected, managing a weak smile. For a moment, there was silence in just the hum of the reactor and the distant sounds of the station's automated systems coming back online. The immediate danger had passed, but Ethan knew the battle wasn't over. The damage to the station was still extensive, and there were hundreds of injured passengers who needed help. "Nova," Ethan said, struggling to stay upright. "What's the status of the rest of the station?" "Emergency teams have begun containment of the fires in Section 12, and life support has been restored in most critical areas," Nova reported. "However, there are still significant casualties in the lower decks, and communication remains intermittent." Ethan nodded. "Zara, take the rest of the team and start triage. I'll catch up." Zara hesitated, eyeing him with concern. "You need to rest, Ethan. Your heart's not going to hold up if you keep pushing it." "I'll rest when everyone's safe," Ethan said firmly, though he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going. Zara gave him a long look but didn't argue. She knew him well enough to understand that he wasn't going to stand down. "All right," she said, "but don't think I'm not keeping an eye on you." With that, she turned and led the remaining rescue team out of the control room, leaving Ethan alone with the hum of the reactor and the soft glow of the control panels. He stood there for a moment, leaning heavily against the console. His heart was still erratic, and the pain in his chest hadn't subsided. He knew he was on borrowed time, but he wasn't done yet. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed himself away from the console and began making his way toward the lower decks, where the worst of the damage had been reported. As he walked, he tapped into his neural implants again, pulling up a map of the station's most damaged areas. The corridors were a mess of twisted metal, debris, and the occasional flicker of emergency lighting. It looked like a war zone. But the worst part was the bodies. Some had already been covered by the rescue teams, but others lay exposed, reminders of the lives that had been lost in the chaos. Ethan's heart ached, both physically and emotionally. He had seen too much death in his career, but it never got easier. Every life lost was a reminder of the cost of failure. He reached the lower decks and found Zara and the others already hard at work. They had set up a makeshift triage center, treating the injured as best they could. Ethan immediately joined them, pushing aside his own pain to focus on the task at hand. Hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and quick decisions. The bionic rescue team worked tirelessly, their enhanced bodies allowing them to perform feats of strength and precision that no ordinary human could manage. But even they had their limits. By the time they finished, the station was finally beginning to stabilize. The fires had been extinguished, life support was fully restored, and the injured were receiving proper care. It wasn't over. There would be weeks of recovery and repair, but the immediate crisis had passed. Ethan stood by one of the medical bays, watching as his team finished up. He felt a deep sense of exhaustion settling over him, both physically and mentally. His heart was still beating irregularly, and he knew it wouldn't be long before his body forced him to rest. Zara approached him, wiping sweat from her brow. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "Yeah," Ethan said, leaning against the wall. "We did." There was a pause, and then Zara looked at him more closely. "Ethan, you need to get that heart looked at. You're not going to make it if you keep pushing yourself like this." He nodded, too tired to argue. "I will," as soon as we're back on solid ground. Zora shook her head but didn't push the issue. She knew him well enough to know that he wasn't going to change. Just don't wait too long. As she walked away, Ethan let out a long breath. The station was quiet now, the chaos finally giving way to a fragile peace. But even as he stood there, surrounded by the remnants of the disaster, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The incident with the solar flare had revealed weaknesses in the bionic systems, weaknesses that could be catastrophic in the future. Ethan had always trusted the technology that kept him alive, but now, for the first time, he felt a seed of doubt. Was this the future they had signed up for? A future where humanity's reliance on technology was both its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability? Ethan didn't have the answers. All he knew was that he would keep fighting for the people who depended on him, fighting to make sure that the technology they trusted wouldn't betray them. As he looked out at the stars through the station's observation window, he felt a strange sense of resolve settle over him. The universe was vast, and the challenges they faced were many. But as long as he was still standing, he would do whatever it took to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves, even if it meant pushing his own body to the brink.